Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
And I'm Joe Healey with DevilsDigest.com.
Joe, 25 years is both a long amount of time and also a dang, that is really not long at all. I feel like, I graduated high school not too long ago, but I graduated from high school 25 years ago. A lot can happen.
Yeah, when you become of a certain age, like Brad and myself, the time tends to fly, and numbers like 25 don't seem as long ago as they are, but man, they are. And, before we enter this 2025 season of college football, and here we are July 1st, and man, when the calendar flips from June to July, it really starts to feel like football is getting in the air. So before we turn the page to 25, we're going to look back on those 25 years of Sun Devil football from 2000 to 2024 and unveil our heavily researched, possibly controversial, definitely informative, hopefully entertaining, all quarter century team for Sun Devil football.
25 seasons. There's been a lot of good, some great, a lot of not so great. But I think what the one constant has been, even in like the darkest of times, there have always been great players. The Sun Devils on both sides of the ball, all three phases of the game, have had some great standout players. And so putting together this list was pretty challenging because while we're going to honor the best of the best, there's so many great players that just fell a little bit short. And that's not to take away anything from what they accomplished in the maroon and gold.
Yeah, I mean, you have players who are already in ASU's Hall of Fame, some that might be angled toward the college football and or pro football halls of fame. Guys that went on to lengthy and illustrious professional careers, or ones that are in other walks of life now that are, making Sun Devils proud everywhere. And we've got guys across the whole spectrum of this time period, some that played just last year, some that just kind of made the cut on the early part of the 21st century. So before we dive into it, if you're going to play the game, you got to play by the rules, right? So there are a few very, very basic ground rules. And this is largely, the first one, the primary one, is largely just because of the nature of college sports right now and the transfer portal and things like that. So we decided that the players had to have played at a minimum of 15 games within the era of 2000 to 2024. So what's that going to do? That's going to cut out some of the players that were maybe, senior grad transfers of the last few years, or ones that are younger players on the roster right now. And there are a few particular names that we'll mention as we go through this list that you'll notice are absent. It also cuts out some players from the early part of the century who were just winding down in the year 2000. But all in all, I think that really doesn't take too many guys out of the equation that should be, otherwise the list that we went with, as you mentioned, Brad, it was there's some areas where there are no brainers. There are some areas where it was some really tough decisions. And this is a, collective, comprehensive list. We've done other lists like this in the past where I have mine, Brad has his. We compare and contrast. We get the social media involved and people tell us how much they love us or how much we suck. We all have a good time about it. But for this one, since it's such a big deal, again, a quarter century, we haven't even been around quite that long, but we've been around for a while. We wanted to make this, again, a cohesive thing. So it's the official Speak of the Devils all quarter century team.
Yeah, I mean, there's some guys you mentioned that perhaps will get a head start on the next quarter century team. Maybe we'll probably still be around doing the podcast. I mean, we've been around for more of this quarter century than we haven't been at this point. So, but in our respective past, we've seen a lot of Sun Devil football going back to the 90s, 2000s, 80s. So we've seen a lot. So I feel like this effort has been obviously very well researched. I mean, Sun Devil. Dean of Sun Devil Science sitting across from me here. So I feel like this is like a pretty comprehensive list, but any list is always going to have some questions from folks. So we encourage you folks to, again, kind of tell us who got snubbed, where we got things right. And let's start things off on the offensive side of the ball, Joe. Quarterback. Now, this was one that I think there's a couple ultimately kind of a 2-horse race, but some other guys just missed the cut either from eligibility or just, weren't up to, I think, this level at the game's most important position.
Yeah. And as we go through this, we'll throw out some other names, not necessarily a full honorable mention or second team. We're just keeping this to the team that we selected, but we'll let you know the ones that really came close on the list, but maybe just didn't quite make it. And starting with quarterback, before we name the person we selected, again, a guy's name who's absent from this list will be Sam Levitt, because as we mentioned, 15 games minimum. Now then, could he be the quarterback of the next quarter century? If he keeps playing like he's playing, that might be the case. So it might be a little controversial pick, but the person, I guess you could say, the first runner up on this is record-setting quarterback Andrew Walter. Meaning, Brad and I both agreed on the selection of the quarterback to begin the all-quarter century team, Taylor Kelly. Of course, was on the Sun Devil roster from 2010 to 2014. And my goodness, ASU had tremendous success under his guidance at quarterback. He, of course, started as a 2-star prospect out of the state of Idaho, only made it to ASU because there was a decommitment at quarterback in that recruiting class, and ASU needed to fill that spot. I don't know what it is about quarterbacks out of the state of Idaho, but the Devils are 2 for 2 with him and Jake the Snake. Just to run through some of the numbers, he is ASU's career completion percentage record holder with a minimum of 500 attempts at 63.3%. He's the school's career leader in quarterback rushing yards with 1,404. ASU's career leader in pass efficiency for 401 or more career attempts at 147.69. He has the second lowest career interception percentage with a minimum of 750 passing attempts at 0.0248. That's 21 picks thrown in 847 attempts. It's tied for the second and third highest single season touchdown passing marks. That's important. He wasn't just an accurate passer, not just a mobile guy. He could find the end zone as well. He had 29 touchdown passes in 2012, 28 in 2013. He's third all-time at ASU in career touchdown passes with 79, fourth in yards at 8,819. The 2012 season, even though the 2013 and 14 ones were, highly successful win total-wise, 2012, he had an incredible statistical year, the highest pass efficiency mark in a season in Sun Devil football history for a guy who threw 301 or more attempts at 159.88. He's the school's single season record holder in completion percentage with 301 or more attempts at 67.1% in that 2012 season. And I know that the topic of like win-loss record among quarterbacks is a debated one, and I get that, but the games he started, ASU was 26-11. That's a very, very good record. It was difficult to decide between him and Andrew Walter, but in the end, Brad and I both agreed that TK, man, he was a winner. Boy, did he operate Mike Norvell's offense just to the perfect level. And someone that I think of when I think of Taylor Kelly, I think of, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. I remember after he ended his career at Arizona State, it's like, man, I didn't really know what we had in TK.
One of the most underrated Devils, any position, any era, because he was just a really steady, but also flashy, but also smart. He checked so many boxes of what the modern quarterback needs and what was on full display in that Mike Norvell offense. And if he doesn't break his foot against, I believe, Colorado in 2014, this selection might not even be close, because that obviously kind of impacted him once he came back in kind of the tail end of 14. But really, just one of the most fun quarterbacks to watch. And that 2012 season, I remember with the coach coming after the Erickson era, so many question marks into how is this team going to look, and this vagabond coach who keeps jumping around places and such. And then an 8-win season, and the way he operated, and early, kind of getting through that early platoon period with some other quarterbacks in that room, but really just one of the outstanding Sun Devils, a true leader on and off the field, and really I think just well deserving of this honor.
And that underdog aspect, that underdog mentality was shown in a way that we still use as a comparison to this day. The old story of him being quarterback 3 during spring practices, and by the time the opening game came around, he was QB1 and never really looked back. So Taylor Kelly is our quarterback for the all-century team. Now, moving on to running back. And oh, by the way, we're going to do maybe it's some kind of funky lineups in terms of the amount of players and things like that. So we'll kind of describe that as we go. We're picking 2 tailbacks for this team. I don't think there's going to be too much controversy with these, though there are a lot of great options that we could have gone with. We'll name some of those ones. Now, one name I'll throw out as far as like the not eligible because he didn't play at least 15 games, Valade. I know he played here in a season that was very forgettable, but what he did was very, very memorable. Some other names that, just barely didn't make the cut because ASU has had some stellar running backs in the last 25 seasons. Ryan Terrain, one of my favorite players of all time. Cam Marshall, somebody that just steadily put together an incredible career. Marion Grice, someone like Terrain, who just was just an absolute, touchdown machine in the 2 years he played here. Demario Richard, our good buddy, Sun Devil to the end, someone who's in the top tier of ASU's all-time rushers, certainly deserves mention here as well. Rashad White, again, hugely productive in what he's done. Now he's playing in the NFL. So those are the ones that almost made the cut.
Yeah, the Cam Marshall especially, like another kind of like on the TK line, like he's one of 4 guys with 40 plus touchdowns as a Sun Devil. So but like never really just got the attention, the accolades that some other backs around. So I just shout out to Cam Marshall for the 40 touchdown club. Still only 4 members deep at this point. Damarious Richard, I think, is still in the top 5 all time in school rushing yards. That one was a tough one as well. I'll have more thoughts on Grice here in a little bit, but and also I also think that we were threatened if we didn't mention Keegan Herring at some point, real or not on Twitter.
There you go. All right.
But such an explosive player. But this is one of those positions that whether it's this modern era or throughout history, ASU has been really fortunate and blessed to have so many talented backs.
Yeah, and I remember around the time that like when we were in college, it was kind of rare that ASU would have a 1,000-yard rusher. Yeah. And then things just really accelerate. I remember Ryan Terrain was one of the first in a while. And then just as, the 21st century evolved and got into the Dennis Erickson, Todd Graham years, things really started to increase there. So getting to the 2 that we picked, the first selection was a highly regarded recruit out of the state of Texas. He committed to Arizona State at the U.S. Army All-America game. And man, by the end of year 2, in a Sun Devil uniform, he had etched his name into Sun Devil lore. A big-time fan favorite, record-setting running back. Of course, we're talking about Eno Benjamin. Man, what he did in 2018 was unbelievable. He set school records in rushing attempts with 300. That's quite a bit of work. 1,642 rushing yards. That overtook, I believe, something like a 45-year-old record by Woody Green. Single game record of 312 yards versus Oregon State. Again, that broke a record that was set in the 1970s. So that 2018 season, which was interesting because, that was his opportunity. He was part of a group in 2017 with those seniors like Kalen Ballage and Demario Richard. When Eno had his opportunity, he took full advantage of it.
Yeah, and that Colorado game in 2017, part of that, is RB3. He had that one touchdown run where he bounced off like 7 Buffaloes, spinning around, showing the determination he would not be denied till he got into the end zone. That was kind of like the little appetizer for the main course that was 2018 when he just absolutely exploded. And I remember being in the press box that night against Oregon State and just near like in that second half, just bouts of collective laughter when he was just reeling off run after run and piling up that it was just kind of one of those. The only other time I can think of that related to that was the Ballage touchdown game. Like, are we really seeing this? But yes, we were. And it wasn't just like he had one great night under the lights. It was just consistent. And, mentioned when you're breaking a record that stands for 4 decades, you're doing something historic and pretty darn special.
Yeah, some other numbers on Eno. He's 4th all-time at ASU with 16 career 100-yard games. The guys that he's behind, some legendary names, if you know the history of Sun Devil football: Woody Green, Freddie Williams, and Whizzer White.
Not bad.
And those are guys from the 1970s for the first 2 and the 1940s and early 50s for Whizzer White. So that shows you the company and how rare it is to do that sort of thing here. Eno is one of only 3 Sun Devils to surpass 1,500 rushing yards in a season, or at least at the time that he did so, he was. He also set a school record of 9 100-yard rushing games in 2018. He had 18 total touchdowns that year. He followed that up with nearly 1,100 rushing yards and 12 total touchdowns in 2019, making him the first Sun Devil since Freddie Williams in 1974 and 75 to post back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing season. Like we were talking about, the 1,000-yard rushing seasons, there was a time that was a very irregular thing. Also caught 82 passes, went on to an NFL career as well. So, you got to start this list with Eno Benjamin at running back. And if you paid attention to the names that were kind of the runners-up or the ones that we put into consideration, and a name that was absent from there, and obviously we mentioned Eno first. This guy, he played 2 years at Arizona State, so he certainly meets the requirement. We cannot have this list without the guy who just made so much magic last season for Arizona State, of course, Cam Skattebo.
So not too long ago, we had the discussion about, is he on the Mount Rushmore of Sun Devil players? And that's been something that, just 2 years, and one of those years was a 3-9 year, but just his impact of just, completely rewriting the record book. And you'll go over the numbers in a second, but just the way he did it, the way he was the catalyst, the heart, the soul, the fire, the piss and vinegar of this team to turn things around and and change a trajectory of the program, putting all those huge numbers that put together. Kind of we're blown away by what Scat did a season ago, and it's just some might say recency bias, but I don't think so when you take the collective 2-year total, but also what he meant in terms of just changing the feel, the everything around surrounding Son of Football. He helped to really activate the Valley.
I mean, there are so few players in the history of this football program that you can look at it and really, point to them as potential game changers, shape shifters, program adjusters like Cam Scadaboo. That's a Jake Plummer type of thing, guys from the 70s that you can throw out there as well, though they had a ton of talent. So it's tough to really, focus on one that did that under Frank Cush. Just absolutely amazing stuff. And even the whole recency bias thing, again, we're going to jump into the numbers and tell you that it's far from recency bias because he broke records and did things not only that hadn't been done at Arizona State in many years, things that didn't really happen across college football in a long time. So let's give you some reminders. It hasn't been that long since Scout was in a Sun Devil uniform, but if you happen to have forgotten, we talked about Eno Benjamin setting some records, and though it took 45 years for those to be broken by Sun Devil rusher, and when Eno did it, it only took about 6 years for those to be toppled by Cam Scadaboo. He broke Eno Benjamin's single-season rushing record. He totaled 1,711 yards on 293 carries with 21 rushing touchdowns, added 605 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns, along with that passing touchdown that we will not forget. He was the first FBS player with over 1,500 rushing yards and 500 receiving yards in a season since Christian McCaffrey in 2015. That is some positive company, to say the least. He broke a 75-year-old record at Arizona State by surpassing Whizzer White's 22 total touchdowns from 1950. Scat finished 5th in the Heisman Trophy voting. He is the first Sun Devil to crack the top 10 since Jake Plummer finished 3rd in 1996. He was also a first-team All-American. And, oh, by the way, it wasn't just a one-year wonder. Again, I know that 2023 season was pretty forgettable, but he had 1,069 combined rushing and receiving yards in that year with 10 total touchdowns. As we know, he punted, he threw passes, started at quarterback, jack of all trades, Swiss Army knife, did it all. So even though the 2024 season for Cam Scadaboo will never be forgotten, the 2023 season was solid as well. You put that together, obviously more than deserving of being on this list.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's those accolades, and we talked about the turning the program around, but I think maybe his greatest impact will be felt 15, 20 years down the road. All the kids who watched that playoff game and saw him, put the team on his back, throw the touchdown pass, make that big catch with his helmet getting torn off, and just willing this team to double overtime again, against the heavily favored Texas Longhorns, and just that attitude. And now he's with the Giants. But I think the seeds that Scat planted in terms of the fan base, getting people reinvigorated, reinvested, being proud to wear the maroon and gold, I think that could ultimately be one of those reasons why 10 years from now he is one of those guys that is more than just a 2-year player or some gaudy stats, but he's one of those foundational Mount Rushmore type guys.
The players from the 1997 Rose Bowl team, the ones that really lit the fire for folks from Brad, my generation, the Jake Plumbers, the Keith Pools, Juan Roque, Pat Tillman, and a list of others. The impact that those sort of players had on our fanhood and the things that we either do for a living or freelance, basically the reasons that we're sitting here talking to y'all right now, again, as you're talking about a decade or two down the road, we'll see if there are people that have such a fiery passion for Sun Devil football and Sun Devil athletics based on what they saw last year as a kid. So Scat and Eno Benjamin are your tailbacks on this roster. Moving right along, if we're putting together this list, and you got Brad and me doing it, you better believe we're going to throw a fullback on that list. And though ASU hasn't used it for that entire quarter century, there's a name on there that you got to throw on it. When you have number 44 out there absolutely cracking skulls, you know that he's worth being remembered 25 years later. We're talking about Mike Carney, of course, was on the Sun Devil roster from 2000 to 2003 out of the state of Washington. He was a 2-time honorable mention all Pac-10 fullback, caught 37 passes with a touchdown, rushed 32 times. The fans wanted so much more. If you were around during that time, it was give Carney the damn ball. Signs and chants in Sun Devil Stadium at the time for Mike Carney. He, of course, went on to a 7-year NFL career with the Saints and the Rams as well. You know, good friend of ours, just a guy that still loves Sun Devil football, still, of course, loves the game of football, still looks like he could go out there and push around some linebackers and take them back about 10 yards. But again, there haven't been a lot of fullbacks, but one of the best in program history played in this era.
It was so fun to watch him. Yeah, and I was one of those people just wanting to see the ball in 44's hand, just some way or form, because he ran with malice, but also, you know, with or without the ball, and just, you know, the way he, so I have my computer, I have like a highlight reel that he sent a while back that I'll check it out occasionally. Just him, like, you know, getting through the hole, leading the way, just decleating, destroying defenders, and it's just so fun to watch. I just like people. I mean, my love of fullbacks is well known. So, like, to have one of the best in the conference, playing in that time, it's special, and that's one of the things that I really like about the Big 12, compared to the Pac-10/12, is the Big 12 and their preseason all Big 12 ballot has a spot for a fullback, so they know ball.
There you go, like it, and legendary stories of Mike Carney and his training and pulling around his vehicle and things like that, just like old school football fullback type of stuff. So, man, think of that backfield that we've illustrated for you right now. You got Taylor Kelly at quarterback. You got Mike Carney at fullback. Let's do a little split back with Eno Benjamin, Cam Scadaboo back there. Who's stopping that? Absolutely nobody. So let's move on with the offense. We're going to name our wide receivers. We went with 4 wide receivers to make out the team, but honestly, as we break them down, you'll probably agree with us that of the ones we chose, you can't cut any of them. Now there's going to be one player that's noticeable for not being eligible, again, not meeting that 15-game requirement that we set in place, and that's Jordan Tyson. He's obviously been on the Sun Devil roster for 2 years, but having been injured in 2023 and missing some action last year as well, he's not quite there. But again, like Sam Levitt, as we turn the page to the next quarter century, he's someone that could very well, be an early candidate for that list. As far as somebody that just barely missed the cut, there have been a lot of talented wide receivers, but really narrowing it down to the elite of the elite. The one that was just on the outside looking in for us was Brandon Ayuk. And it's pretty basic logic with that, is that he had one absolutely superstar season that propelled him into a first-round pick, and now he's, among the better wide receivers in the NFL. His junior season, after coming to ASU in the JUCO level, was very good. It just was, he's playing behind N'Keal Harry and some others, so it was kind of a really good 1 year and a good second year. By comparison to the ones that we will select, just didn't quite stack up quite enough as far as longevity of the others.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Go look at these 4 guys here, but yeah, Ayuk especially, coming in, I believe, Alabama wanted him at corner and came here, and just kind of fit a role and then exploded. Lethal kick return, punt returner as well.
Yeah.
Just that get the Oregon State return. It was like, he's one of those games where I think he kind of put the team on his back. Came up a little short if I'm mistaken, but he did everything he could. Really explosive, really fun to see him continue to have that success in the NFL. Hopefully he's going to be fully healthy for this upcoming season.
So starting with the list, and if you haven't noticed, we're doing these basically in chronological order within the position. A Phoenix native, a guy who recently went into ASU's Sports Hall of Fame. We talked to him about it when it happened. It was long overdue, but it's good that it happened. We are talking about Sean McDonald. He was on the Sun Devil roster from 1999 to 2002. He redshirted his first season. He set a school single season record of 87 catches and had 1,405 yards, also a single season record. That happened in 2002. He was a finalist that year for the Biletnikoff Award. I believe he's the only Sun Devil in program history to be a finalist for that award. When he finished his career, he was second all-time at ASU in career receiving yards with 2,867 and third all-time in Sun Devil history with 156 career catches, also third in touchdown receptions with 24. And at that point, he'd only played 3 seasons. And others among the top tier of Sun Devil rankings at that time were your 4-year guys. He's still ASU's career leader in yards per catch for players who have at least 151 receptions at 18.4. He was a downfield threat, to say the least. He was a third-team All-American in 2002, an honorable mention All-American in 2001, and a first-team All-Pac-10 selection both years. The first player in Sun Devil history to post back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons. As we mentioned, he was a finalist for the Biletnikoff Award in 2002, and in 2023 was inducted into ASU's Sports Hall of Fame. Very happy to have seen him to get that recognition. Those of us who saw him play, man, he, different body type, but a guy like a Brandon Ayuk who could get down the field, who was a special teams performer as well. We saw him play. We were in school at the time. The combination he had with Andrew Walter, especially that 2002 season, was something very special.
Yeah, I believe he also had like a 4-touchdown game, which still hasn't been equal or exceeded in that mark. But really a fun, exciting player. Big, one of the, it was 18.4 yards per catch. I mean, one of those guys that just seemed like every time his hands touched the ball, huge things happen, and just such a lethal combination with Andrew Walter, who and some explosive offenses. Because after the kind of the heights of the late 90s, there was kind of some time in the wilderness for the program, and this really brought excitement back and kind of led almost seamlessly into another golden age with a dominant wide receiver for our next selection.
Yeah, and Sean McDonald, that when Dirk Cutter came in 2001 and brought that high-powered passing attack, Sean McDonald, Andrew Walter, of course, as well, some of the top beneficiaries of that change of staff. And as you mentioned, an easy transition into our next pick, as Sean McDonald was wrapping up his Sun Devil career, though he departed for the NFL a year early. This next guy was just starting his Sun Devil career as a true freshman in 2002, and by the time he was done, he rewrote the record book in Sun Devil receiving, and those records still stand to this day, 20 years later. We're, of course, talking about Derek Hagan.
Yeah, I mean, the guy just made huge play after huge play. Rewrote the record book, and I believe you just fell a little bit shy of like the Pac-10 records at the time in terms of receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns. 3 1,000-yard receiving seasons for the Sun Devils, only player in program history to do that. But just so fun to watch, and just really, it was really just cool to just see his development, kind of making a little bit of an impact in 2002, and kind of playing the behind Sean McDonald wrapping up his historic career. But then what a luxury for the Sun Devil program to go and then like turn the page the next season and just go on another run of a true wide receiver one.
If I'm not mistaken, I think at the time he set the freshman receiving record in terms of receptions. Yeah. That's been broken many times since, but you could see those flashes of what he could do. And he was not a highly regarded recruit, I believe a 2-star, if I'm not mistaken. He was a third-team All-American in 2005, second-team All-American in 2004. He was first-team All-Pac-10 both of those years. As you mentioned, the only player in school history, which remains to this day, with 3 1,000-yard receiving seasons. He owns the school record of 8 games with at least 150 yards. ASU's career leader, again, in all major receiving numbers, 258 catches, 3,939 yards, and 27 touchdowns. In 2015, he was inducted into ASU's Sports Hall of Fame, and obviously for a short bit, he was on the Sun Devil coaching staff as well. Just somebody that was as sure-handed as you'll ever see, kind of a full package, and not an absolute burner, but by no means slow. Just a guy who was so tremendously reliable in what he did, and made it into an art form that, man, he just, after that freshman season, which again, showed that potential there. 2003, 4, and 5. He was among the best receivers in college football.
And we talked about records that stood for decades, and I just wonder if any Sun Devil, kind of given the modern game, the transfer portal, just guys leaving school early after a couple of years of success, if anybody's going to touch that 258 catches, almost 4,000 yards receiving.
It's like an average of 1,000 per year on a 4-year scale.
Yeah.
If you have a guy that's doing that kind of thing, they're not going to stick around for 4 years in the transfer portal and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, that might be a show for another time of the unbreakable Sun Devil records. So again, the first 2 of the 4 wide receivers, we've got Sean McDonald and Derek Hagan moving right along, maybe about a 10-year gap until we get to the next one. But this is someone, he played just 2 years in a Sun Devil football uniform, but in those 2 years, my goodness, did he make an impact, and not coincidentally played for the only back-to-back 10-win teams ASU has had since the 1970s. Of course, we're talking about our good friend, Jalen Strong, the co-author of the Jail Mary, but he did so much more than that. Despite just playing those 2 years, he still stands 8th all-time in ASU with 157 catches and 9th with 2,287 receiving yards. Pretty crazy. He can be in the top 10 in both those categories, just having played 2 years. He was a first-team All-American and first team all Pac-12 in 2014, second team all conference in 2013. He's ASU's career leader in receptions per game and receiving yards per game. For his career, he averaged 6.04 receptions per game and 87.9 receiving yards per game. So statistically, talent-wise, there are categories where you could honestly say Jalen Strong is the best wide receiver in Sun Devil football history if you look at those statistics.
You say Jalen Strong, almost everybody's going to think of the Jail Mary first and foremost. Second is how unstoppable was the back shoulder TK to Jalen, and also just the ridiculous degree of difficulty catches he made. That catch on the sideline just inside the pylon against Notre Dame, the one-handed snag the back of the end zone against U of A in 14, just the jump balls. Like that guy would turn 50-50 balls into 80-20s.
Yeah. And you look at this lineup, and man, like the fantasy football element of it, you got TK at quarterback. Think of this 3 receiver set, though. Of course, we're going to have a fourth here. Sean McDonald, he's your downfield burner. D. Haig, he is, I know possession receiver is something that gets a negative connotation, but just the sure-handed guy. And then you got Jalen Strong, where you can just toss it up anywhere in the same zip code. He'll catch the ball. You talked about somebody, who can make miraculous catches, turn 50-50 into 80-20 or 90-10 or 99-1. And our next and 4th out of 4 wide receivers did all of that. Of course, the hometown hero coming to ASU by way of Chandler High School. We are, of course, talking about N'Keal Harry,
a 5-star who lived up to the hype. And I don't know how many times during his 3 seasons that I tweeted out just N'Keal, because there's kind of words failed about how he made that catch, how he made that play. So many times that you're just like the UTSA and Utah, where he just was a bit literally like in the freeze frame, surrounded by people, and a guy that size and that physical shouldn't have the moves or the speed that he did, and yet he did. Or don't return that. And then against USC, that punt return back inside the 5
when he was just put in, because ASU had issues fielding punts, and he was just mainly put there to catch the ball cleanly and do nothing else.
Broke the cardinal rule.
Yeah, but then he has what was like a 95 or so yard punt return. Well, yeah, I actually was watching that highlight not too long ago, where it's like, I remember thinking in my head, I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Oh, here we go. He hit that corner.
That's the same game he had that ridiculous falling down backwards. But then like the freshman year, like that game against UTSA in San Antonio, where he had that like falling down I think the defender had his left arm pinned, but he still made the catch falling out. And like, oh, this guy's I get the 5-star. This guy's special. And man, what he ended up doing over the course of his 3 seasons was truly remarkable.
And just to put some numbers and categories on it here, he's a 2-time first team all Pac-12 selection, 1-time honorable mention. He's 3rd all-time in career receptions with 213. Everyone else in the top 7 for ASU is a 4-year player. N'Keal, of course, was a 3-year guy. He's 3rd all-time in career receiving yards with 2,889, and 3rd all-time in career receiving yards per game at 78.1. 2nd all-time in career receptions per game behind our previous guy, Jalen Strong. N'Keal averaged 5.76 receptions per game for his career. He's got the 4th most career receiving touchdowns with 22. He broke ASU's freshman receiving record with 58 catches in 2016. So he really showed immediately, even though that 2016 season was a tough one with all the injuries for ASU, he really showed what he had from a very early point. Of course, he was chosen 32nd overall in the 2019 NFL draft, ASU's first round wide receiver pick since Aaron Cox in 1988, and just a stand-up guy. And that can be said about everybody we've listed so far. But it's always great to see when you've got players who don't let the ego get to their head, don't let the accomplishments get to their head. I mean, I'll always never forget, always remember at the team banquet in 2018. Before I attended that banquet, obviously he was just about to wrap up his career and enter the NFL draft, and there was like a pre-banquet, happy hour, social hour, and he was there at the door just greeting people and saying thank you and saying hello and that sort of thing. And this is a guy who's going to play. I may have even sat out the bowl game. I'm not sure. He was off to an NFL career. You don't have to do that kind of thing, but it just kind of shows the caliber of human being that he is.
Yeah, and just the extra layer of being the homegrown guy just made it all the more special. Obviously a good buddy of his will show up a little bit later on. We talk about the defensive side of things, but yeah, just the fact that there's some homegrown Arizona talent on this list, I think just adds a kind of cool element. But that didn't factor in. This is all merit based. But I think it's nice. But yeah, a truly good dude. He's been was a first round pick, and kind of bounced around a little bit in the league. But man, just watching him week in, week out, and just kind of rewrite the laws of physics on his own, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So that's our 4 wide receiver set: Sean McDonald, Derek Hagan, Jalen Strong, N'Keal Harry. You got to go get Charles Woodson, Deion Sanders, Mike Haynes, get them to switch teams for a minute. You got to bring out your best in the secondary if you're going to have any chance of stopping these guys. And what a perfect segue into our next pick, talking about the homegrown talent, the hometown hero. There really is no one else in this era or many others that defines hometown hero like the pick that we're making, because we're selecting an all-purpose athlete to be a part of this roster. Before we name that, I'll give you a little tease. There are a lot of names that we could have thrown on here. One that I really thought of that encompassed a lot of different categories in his Sun Devil career. Huge fan favorite, Rudy Burgess, tailback, wide receiver, even played a little defensive back. Someone that really deserves being mentioned here. I think there might have been some other names. There are guys that running back that you can throw in this category as well, where there are other all-purpose. I think you might have been going here talking about Marion Grice, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, just because what he was able to do, his impact as a pass catcher. Yeah. They even threw him back at there to return kicks. A guy that holy elbow catch against Washington in the end zone. Just 2 years, but in that mix. But yeah, Rudy Burgess playing both sides of the ball a little bit there, being so dynamic, so impactful. This was every category had some real tough cuts.
And Rudy, I think, had that touchdown, kickoff return for a touchdown that Thanksgiving game against USC in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. But with no further ado, we gave you that little teaser of the hometown hero. I think you know where we're going with this. Of course, we're going with DJ Foster. You can't pick anybody else, man. He was here, of course, from 2012 to 2015, the crown jewel of Todd Graham's first signing class as just that absolute elite player out of Saguaro High School. In Scottsdale. When his career ended, he was one of only 5 Division I players to, in his career, rush and receive for at least 2,000 yards. He ranks second all-time at ASU behind Derek Hagan in career receptions with 222 and 7th in receiving yards with 2,458. And this is a guy, for his first 3 years, was technically a running back before being moved to wide receiver. And when he was a running back, he was a second-team all-conference selection in 2014 when he ran for 1,081 yards for ASU's 10-win team that season. He owns the school record of 53 straight receiving games with at least 1 reception. You know how many games he played at ASU?
Sounds about the same number.
Yeah, he played 53 games. He caught a pass at least once in every single game he played at Arizona State. In all, he had 4,829 all-purpose yards. Of course, he went on to win a Super Bowl in the NFL, play in Canada, and has returned to Sun Devil Athletics for the past few years in an administrative capacity for Kenny Dillingham's staff. So, when you're talking about the state of Arizona as it pertains to Sun Devil football, to me, this is like the first name, all due respect, of course, to N'Keal Harry, some others that we'll mention throughout the course of this list. But DJ Foster just stands in a different category of his own to me.
Kind of in the wake of the Erickson era and all the uncertainty, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but with DJ making his decision, landing that was such a huge moment of like, okay, tap the brakes. Things might actually be okay for Sun Devil football. And then, that I believe the very first play in like 2012 opener at NAU, I think was a 12-yard pass to DJ. And it's like, okay, they know what they got. And just,
I think it was like in traffic too. Like, I think it was a pretty impressive one. Wasn't a gimme if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And then obviously was part of that, that very deep backfield with Grice and Cam Marshall in 2012. Then, was such a key player in 13, got the lead back role in 14. Still wish they would have kept him. It didn't make the move in 15. I think, but regardless, wherever he was on the field, he was making a difference. And, but then you add the character that he brought to the team, the kind of person he is, the administrative work that he's doing now and working with the players in terms of helping them get set for life off the field and developing them, as men of character. No better person than DJ Foster to lead that role. And, Kenny Dillingham's program is built on, more so like the guys in living the proper life. Lifers is their acronym that they use. And, DJ Foster has been such a critical part of that. And it's just really his impact in the local community it's storybook up until just falling just short of perhaps win a conference title or something like that, but just everything that he could control, he did absolutely exquisitely.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you needed him to do, he was on top of it. If you need him to be that slash guy, he's that. When Marion Grice went down to injury late in the season, you give him the ball and he wins the Bob Moran Trophy against U of A. You want him to switch to wide receiver, he goes and does that. Always been, great to us. Not that we're just picking our friends for this sort of list, but that's a thing. And he's so unique in that level, because when we were just getting started, like I remember interviewing him as a true freshman, like in our second year of the show. And that was kind of a cool thing to do because we were just still in our infancy of what we're doing. I would have to anticipate, since he's been out for about 10 years now, probably in the next year or two, it wouldn't shock me one bit if he's entered into ASU Sports Hall of Fame. He'd be incredibly deserving of that. And, it's hard to think of a better person to have in the position that he's in to help guide this younger generation and just bring the honesty and the experiences that he has from the college and the pro levels and being an elite high school player as well locally. So again, we can talk a lot about this guy because we both think very kindly, very highly of him. He's been with us several times. So DJ Foster, your all-purpose athlete. Okay, so we're going to wind down like the skill positions here with tight end. We're going to go with one tight end. Now, this is probably an important one to mention, and a guy who technically is not eligible based on our 15-game standard. That would be Todd Heap, whose final season in a Sun Devil uniform was in 2000. He was here 98, 99, 2000. Also one that just barely missed the cut, someone who was one of the most productive tight ends in Sun Devil history, someone that, bounced around a little bit, but then really caught his stride again. Like we talked about some others. When Todd Graham showed up at Arizona State, there are a handful of players whose productivity, went from here to here, and that's Chris Coyle. So that's someone that, is really worth mentioning, someone that I had a lot of fun watching. He was just kind of an old school guy. Loved the fact he didn't wear gloves. You know what I mean? Just a gritty player out there.
Yeah, he was real fun, and just seeing him go. But and then Todd Heap, of course, like you talk about, arguably the greatest at the position this school has ever seen. And then the Chris Coyle, and especially in 2012 was the record-setting year. In terms of before he kind of the Jalen Strong arrived, just kind of that go-to guy. Then he went off to play Aussie rules football or rugby.
Yeah, he just got into like an undersized guy for the position. Yeah. I think it was about 6'2", 6'3", about 230, something like that. But yeah, an interesting post-college football career, but someone who really should be remembered for what he did. So he certainly merits us having a little talk about him. But as far as the player we picked, you're talking about Todd Heap, arguably being the top tight end in Sun Devil football history. And the reason that you use that qualifier is probably because of this guy as well, because he deserves to be mentioned in that list yet again. A local guy from Desert Vista High School. Of course, we're talking about the truth. Zach Miller played at ASU from 2004 to 2006. In 2006, he became the only consensus All-American tight end in Sun Devil football history. Todd Heap did not have that achievement. He was ASU's receiving leader that year with 50 catches for 484 yards and 4 touchdowns. He is ASU's all-time leader in tight end receptions with 144 and touchdown catches by a tight end with 14. Second all-time behind Heap in tight end receiving yards with 1,512. His 56 catches as a true freshman in 2004 at the time were both the single-season freshman receptions record for ASU for any position, not just tight ends. And at the time, it was also the single-season receptions record for a tight end. So they call him the truth because he stepped in day one and started rewriting the record book among tight ends in Sun Devil football history. And for all his efforts in 2016, he was inducted into ASU's Sports Hall of Fame. He was there when I was in school, and actually his junior season, I was working in ASU sports information department. So kind of helping with some of the things that went on with that consensus All-America, honor that he received. But he was somebody that he could block like a man. He could catch everything. I mean, he would get just absolutely massacred when he caught the ball, and like the defender would get the worst for wear. So he was someone that just was your prototype tight end. Todd Heap kind of had more of the athletic thing going on for him, maybe a little bit ahead of his time in that regard. Very successful NFL player. Zach Miller, very well-rounded with what he could do, catching the ball, blocking, just the total package.
Yeah, I remember when he committed and ASU was able to land him, one of the local guys there. It was obviously a pretty big deal. And then yeah, from the jump, it was like clear this guy was just kind of a cut above. And when you're in the conversation with Todd Heap, you're doing pretty good. And yeah, Zach Miller from the jump really has just been such a difference maker. And what he was, and kind of a nice ASU was able to kind of go, a couple years in between, but just having two very talented guys, two all-time guys at that position, kind of go back to back. And then I was it wasn't made necessarily to Heap standard in the NFL, but Miller went on to have a pretty solid NFL career in his own right, as well. So it's really good to see that position. Maybe not as crowded as some of the others, but not no less impressive in terms of what they were able to do.
So running through the list as of right now, we got Taylor Kelly at quarterback. Our running backs are Eno Benjamin and Cam Scattaboo. Mike Carney at fullback. Our wide receivers are Sean McDonald, Derek Hagan, Jalen Strong, and N'Keal Harry are all-purpose athletes. DJ Foster, and our tight end is Zach Miller. So let's get to the guys up front, the offensive line. How we're going to break this down is we have 2 offensive tackles, 3 interior linemen, and there's a guy that we picked as like a utility offensive lineman. And as we discuss him, I think you'll understand why we went with that selection. So starting with the offensive tackles, first up, this is someone who began as a walk-on at Arizona State, defensive lineman from Eloy, Arizona. But by the time that he was done, he had made himself into a top 10 NFL pick. So he played in this era in 2000 and 2001. Those just happen to be his best seasons at ASU, and that is Levi Jones.
Yeah, just really kind of cool to see what he was able to do. And just you see those guys, from the, and there's several from ASU's history, just like the small town, the corners of the state that come to Tempe and really make their mark. And Levi Jones is one of them. Unfortunately, he went to Cincinnati. And I got to say that, but obviously we're very, very deserving of his lofty draft status there. And just, the accolades he was able to rack up in terms of just locking down things at that tackle spot for the Sun Devil offense was pretty impressive.
Yeah, he was a 3-year starter on the offensive line. And, within this era, again, 2000 to 2024, he was a second-team All-Pac-10 pick in 2000. Absolutely blew up as a senior. He was a second-team All-American, first-team All-Conference. He was the offensive recipient of the 2001 Morris Trophy. If y'all remember, in the Pac-10, Pac-12, they awarded the Morris Trophy every year to the best offensive lineman and best defensive lineman of the year. So he was essentially picked as the top offensive lineman in the entire conference that year. He was picked 10th overall, as I mentioned, in the 2002 NFL draft by the Bengals, played 7 seasons in the NFL, and in 2016, he was inducted into ASU's Sports Hall of Fame. So just a great story. You talk about the local walk-on, change positions, and just really capitalized on what he did at Arizona State. So our next offensive tackle, this is a name that, for those of us who saw him play, know that, he really put together a solid career. He's one of those guys that a lot of teams go after, where he was a little bit undersized weight-wise, but athletic, and he put on some bulk, and he became a very, very talented offensive tackle. And that's going to be Evan Finkenberg, who was on the roster from 2009 to 2013 and just got better and better each year. He and Levi Jones are actually the only full-time offensive tackles in this era to earn first-team all-conference honors. He earned that distinction, did Finkenberg, in 2013. Again, of course, ASU's Pac-12 South Division championship team. He was an honorable mention all-conference honoree earlier in his career, a multi-year starter. Again, one of those guys who was not a highly regarded recruit, just improved and grew each year. And one of those players, kind of in the light of Taylor Kelly, that you appreciate him while he's there, but years after, you're like, man, that was a dang good offensive tackle, and those things do not grow on trees.
Yeah, and ASU sometimes has had problems getting those tackles, or maybe having to play guys maybe better suited to guard at tackle. But Finkenberg had some really impressive athleticism, and just I think one of the unheralded guys that just consistently got better and never was popping up on all kinds of preseason watch lists, but just when you watched him play, when you isolated, when you went back and watched the games and the film, just really solid and just really good. And obviously, it all came to a head along with a lot of other things in 2013. With the South Crown, and then also, of course, his own personal accolades, but just really kind of cool to see what he was able to do. And just for those guys that really just kind of continue year in, year out, put in the work, and just kind of maybe it's a little old school and antiquated at this point, but just over the course of their time, their 4 or 5 years, really make the most of their potential.
And he's someone that, maybe you put in the same category in at least one respect of like a Caleb McCullough. And you like the fact for these guys that stick around. Obviously, the transfer portal wasn't even a thing back then. But, Finkenberg came to the program in 2009. And that was, at a time where ASU went through a back-to-back stretch of some really down years. But by the time he was gone, ASU was among the top teams in the conference. So you like to see those sort of stories pop up. So now those are our 2 tackles again. Of course, Levi Jones, Evan Finkenberg. Moving along to the interior lineman is a teammate of Levi Jones. Oddly, ASU and Dirk Cutter's first year in 2001 it was a not great team. I think they were 4-7, but they had like a really good offensive line. They had at least 3 guys that played in the NFL for a while. This entry is someone who's actually the only Sun Devil offensive lineman in this era to, on multiple occasions, be named a first-team all-conference selection, and that is Scott Peters. He was one of the better interior linemen in all of college football. He ultimately went on to be a 4th-round pick of the Eagles in 2002, and now he spent 7 years in the NFL. Now he's on that Bengals coaching staff. So things coming full circle, with Levi Jones here and Scott Peters. Scott's someone who's been around the program. I've seen him at games, an intense dude, does like some MMA, I believe, on the side, and obviously helps coach young athletes or professional athletes now at the offensive line positions. Someone who's just like the kind of guy that when you picture an offensive lineman, Scott Peters is the kind of guy that should come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely ferocious. It's so appropriate that he's the MMA because like that was kind of just his playing style, just so fierce out there. And then now he's had a successful coaching career. I believe he's also been the Patriots and Browns offensive line or assistant offensive line coaches. So seeing him kind of develop the next generation, he's one of those guys who probably could sit out there and probably has some reps left in him. But seeing what he was able to do and sharing the late stage of his career. Having a very talented offensive line, but he was just a guy that, for me, when I hear that name, I just think of just kind of like a Tasmanian devil in terms of just the ferocity that he played, the violence that the best offensive linemen bring to the trenches.
He's just one of those guys that you're dang glad and thanking your lucky stars that he is standing in front of you with his back to you, as opposed to his face being right face to face with you, if you know what I'm talking about there. So moving along to our next interior offensive line selection, we get back to that hometown hero type of thing. This guy starred for the Sun Devils from 2003 to 2007 after graduating from Corona del Sol High School in Tempe. That, of course, is Mike Pollock. He was a first-team All-Pac-10 selection in 2007, a second-team All-Conference pick the year before in 2006. He started 36 career games, including each and every one of the final 31 games he played. Second-round draft pick of the Colts in 2008, played in the NFL for 7 seasons. Again, similar thing with Scott Peters. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think that they previously associated with one another in some of the training and things that they did, working with guys. I believe that's the case. Don't necessarily quote me on that. Unless I'm right, then you can. But again, just a guy that's like, that dude's an offensive lineman. You look at guys and you can kind of think of what they did when they were, a college or professional athlete. Mike Pollock, every bit of an O-lineman.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's extra cool that, the homegrown guy, the Tempe guy was able to come up there and do that. And I think kind of an underrated NFL career as well, during his time with the Colts. But yeah, just really kind of cool, real fierce, real steady presence there, kind of anchoring those offensive lines during some of those, explosive offensive days.
And moving right along to our third interior offensive lineman. And this is a recent pick, but as we did the research, he stacked up and deserved to be included, and he meets our requirement of 15 games or more played in a Sun Devil uniform. That's going to be Lee Fautanu. If that surprises you to be included here, it really shouldn't. He was a first-team All Big 12. I think it's the first time that we're saying Big 12 in this conversation. We obviously could have for Scat, but the list of honors, is so big that by the time you get to the All Conference, you've already been talking for a few minutes. He was a first-team All Big 12 selection as a center in 2024. He's an honorable mention All Pac-12 pick in 2023. Only one of 6 offensive linemen at any position for ASU since the year 2000 to earn first-team All-Conference honors. Someone that was just a passionate leader. ASU's obviously going to be transitioning at that position with Fautanu out of the program now, Ben Coleman moving in. And he was just somebody that, again, was such an integral part of the success that ASU had. Very unsung, which the offensive linemen typically are, but make no mistake about it, without him there in the trenches, not sure if ASU would have had the success they had.
one of those guys who just among the players in the nation has played a ton of snaps, thousands of snaps in his career. It's always in the game notes, but again, like the best availability is availability, and he was always out there. But also, then the next part of that, he was really good, and he was really steady and anchoring that offensive line that went toe to toe with arguably the best defensive line in the country in Texas in that bowl game. And also the leadership that he brought to that locker room, the one snap brotherhood, as the O line likes to call themselves, and just after shaking off pretty much that forgettable 2023 season where everybody on the offensive line, 11 combinations in 12 games, to really what they were able to do and just kind of put together a really stout unit for an explosive offense was really impressive. And, just and the bonus points for just being one of the key voices in that locker room to help bring about this new era of Sun Devil football that seems to be nothing but bright days ahead.
So before we talk about our utility offensive linemen, just to recap the 5 kind of traditional offensive linemen, we got Evan Finkenberg, Levi Jones at the tackles, interior Scott Peters, Mike Pollock, Lee Fatano. Now there we would have to kind of figure out who all of those guys had experience at center. I believe Peters played some guard as well. We'd have to kind of see how we'd mix and match that one. I think you can't go wrong with just about any combination. So that's that traditional 5 there. The utility offensive line, we kind of created this specifically for this player, and this is somebody that. Man, he was so good in his time, and there are many others on this list that fall under this category of just not talked about as much. And maybe the younger fan base might not even really know much about this player. Maybe he didn't go on to NFL stardom, but during his time at Arizona State, he was such a versatile, complete, and accomplished offensive lineman. That's Grayling Love. He was on the Sun Devil roster from 2001 to 2005, pretty much the same years that I was in college at Arizona State University. 31 career starts. He started games at ASU at center, left tackle, right guard, and right tackle. And that's just based on the information like in his bio. There could have been other things as well. I don't know. He might have played defense. Maybe he punted or long snapped. Who knows? He's the only ASU offensive lineman in this era to earn 3 all-conference accolades of second team or greater, as he was a first-team All-Pac-10 pick in 2004 and a second-team selection in 2003 and 2005. A brilliant human being, one of the premier student athletes that Sun Devil football has had in these last 25 years. He was a 2-time first-team Pac-10 all-academic selection. So again, a name that's not always thrown out there, among the best of the best. And if that is the case, it's a wrong thing. So, he's getting the credit he deserves, because Grayling Love was a dang good offensive lineman. And as the information tells you, as versatile as it gets, you just don't see that. Guys that play all of those positions.
Every great offensive line needs that swing guy, the guy that you can plug in at different spots. And, obviously being really smart, having a great football IQ helps, obviously, at center, but also the ability to just, okay, I need to, this week I might be playing left tackle, might have to kick inside or kick out, something like that. And just, that steady presence. And obviously, people took note, obviously offensive line by nature, kind of an unheralded, overlooked position. People, just see it as kind of a collective, but just when you look at what he was able to do, the honors he was able to put together, the versatility and the value that he brought to those Sun Devil teams, easy pick as the swing guy.
So we didn't, mention the guys who missed the cut or that sort of thing. We just want to get the whole offensive line taken care of before we jump into those. One name that, again, doesn't fall in that category of being eligible is Victor Leyva. He's from the earlier end of things. I believe he was a senior in 2000. If I'm not mistaken, a first-team all-conference pick that year, went on to an NFL career. He just only played 1 year in 2000. We got to play by the rules. We're rule followers here. And some other names that, again, were in the conversation, especially in the interior positions. I think the offensive tackles, there was some easy separation there because you only had 2 guys that at any point were first-team all-conference. And I know that we bring up the all-conference thing a lot, and I get that that's subjective, and even I have highly questioned that in certain years. But when you have situations like this, you kind of have to use that as the tiebreaker, so to speak. But some other names that really deserve to be mentioned here, we're going to address them chronologically. Sean Laval, very versatile player, went on to a very solid NFL career as well. Jamil Douglas, I think the world of Jamil Douglas, his story is incredible. He was a great lineman, again, somebody that played a few positions as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's had some off-field issues earlier in his career, was able to kind of really turn things around and become such an impactful player. For me, he was kind of like that next guy out, but also, having such success at guard and tackle, that, again, one of those versatility type of pieces, and also being a member of the teams that had some pretty good success.
Christian Westerman, and that was a great story at the time because that was before transferring really happened that much. He was the big-time 5-star guy from Hamilton High School, began his career at Auburn. When he came back to ASU, that was like such a win at the time, and he turned into a very good player, had a bit of an NFL career as well. A couple guys in more recent years, Cole Cabral put together a very, very good career, as did Donovan West. And it's kind of unfortunate because, the peak of his career, I believe, kind of happened during that COVID season. So, and then you mix in just the NCAA, scandal and things like that. So that can put a cloud over everything, including some of the players that were there, unfortunately. But, West, Cabral, these guys had very, very good careers. So for those interior positions, it was really, really difficult. Scott Peters is a guy that's kind of in a different category because of his accomplishments. But, after that, it was a challenging thing. We're comfortable with our picks. But again, I want y'all to know that, for these, it's not like it's 100% and 0%. Sometimes it's like 55-45 to make some of these cuts.
Yeah, and it just kind of speaks to the quality that we're having to pick through. And even though talk about on the top, there's been some up years, some down years, but through it all, the consistent trend line, really good individual players. So through picking through all those guys, it's pretty hard. And so some of the really deserving guys, sorry Jamel and Mary and all them, but take nothing away from what you did and what you've meant and the legacy that you leave. But man, this is tough. And now we're switching over to the defense and the special teams.
Yeah, and when you're talking about players that make an impact, guys that were really, really good players, that, as you'll understand here in a brief moment, is the understatement of all time. We're going to start with defensive end. We're going to go back to the hometown hero. We're going to talk about the GOAT himself, Sizzle T. Suggs, obviously on this list. You can't have it without him, and that would be any sort of ASU all-time list. Heck, if you're me, you know what? That would be an NCAA all-time list. Yeah. I don't think you can make an NCAA all-time team without Terrell Suggs at defensive end. You know the story by now, but if you don't, here's a reminder. He was a running back at Hamilton High School. I remember watching him play in high school when Hamilton High very first started with the legendary John Wren at head coach there. Came to ASU to play for Bruce Snyder in 2000. And obviously, by the time those 3 short years were done in a Sun Devil uniform, Suggs had vaulted himself into all kinds of record books, and the hardware he collected, I'm sure, fills an entire room, in his home at this point. Just to tell you about him, in case you've been living under a rock for many, many, many years, he finished his career with the NCAA single season and career sacks record with 24 in 2002 and 44 for his 3-year career. Also the school record holder with 66.5 tackles for loss, including a nation-leading 31.5 in 2002. I know ASU played 14 games that year because of a unique schedule, but 31.5, I mean, that's like 2.5 per game. I know he had that game against Washington where he had something like 6 or 7. Yeah, it's just unbelievable. You don't see too many defensive players, that can absolutely just take over a game at their own will. You see guys that can really impact a game, but it's rare that you see someone that is the absolute best player on the entire field and of offense, defense, no matter who's playing in the game. He is the most sensational and talented and capable and dynamic and dangerous performer of them all. He did it his whole career, and we'll break down some more of those accolades. But that 2002 season, watching him do what he did that year, I mean, that was something from a different universe.
Is that the only individual season that's better than Scat's last year?
I would have to think
rarefied
so.
air.
Yeah, those are really the two, like statistically, a guy like Jake and just what he did, from an emotional perspective is something there. But as far as just this person cannot be stopped. And when he, shifts that gear into overdrive, nobody is even going to touch him. Yeah, that was just between what Scat did on offense and Suggs did on defense. Those are the offense and defensive seasons to me that are just, again, these accomplishments that may never be matched. As we break down some more of his accolades, the list is long, so get comfortable. He was, of course, a unanimous All-American in 2002. He won the Rotary Lombardi, the Bronco Nagurski, and the Ted Hendricks Awards. He was a finalist for the Chuck Bednarik Award in 2002. Of course, he was the Pac-10 Defensive Player of the Year, the Morris Trophy winner, first-team All-Conference. But it wasn't just a one-year thing. He was third-team All-American in 2001, freshman All-American in 2000. He was a 2-time first-team All-Pac-10 member. He was the 2000 Pac-10 Freshman of the Year. Double-digit sacks all 3 seasons that he played at ASU. He had an even 10 his first 2 years, and then that 24 sack season in 2002. Of course, he was the 10th overall pick in the 2003 NFL draft, and just one of the weirdest things that you'll ever see when teams just forgot to pick.
That was that draft. Yeah, the Vikings
just forgot to, and if you redrafted, he's probably going 1 or 2 or something like that. A 17-year NFL career, 2-time Super Bowl champ, 7-time Pro Bowler, Defensive Rookie of the Year in 2003, Defensive Player of the Year in 2011, 2022 inductee into ASU Sports Hall of Fame. It took him that long because ASU waits till guys are done playing their pro career. If you play 17 years, it's going to be a while. I think it's an absolute travesty that he is wasn't even on the ballot this past year for the College Football Hall of Fame. That just does not make any sense whatsoever. He's got to get in there in some capacity, but by and large, just the most devastating defender, I think, in Sun Devil football history.
The biggest no-duh type of pick on this entire team. I mean, just the most dominant, arguably the most dominant single season. Just what he did in his career, the hardware, the numbers. You add in, unfortunately, what he did in the NFL. He was so good.
A lot of Ravens and the Bengals on this list so far.
Not great. And but obviously, it was just like everything he did was just so incredible in terms of the impact, and the local angle as well. I remember when he was in high school, there was just kind of like the legend, like kind of like Paul Bunyan-ish.
Because this was like the internet was a thing, but you didn't have the rivals or those recruiting services. I remember looking at some website; it was just such a rudimentary thing with recruiting. So it was like mythical stuff that was in newspapers or just word of mouth. Yeah.
And so like one of our assistant coaches, my junior season at Moon Valley, was talking about just like, oh, maybe we should schedule them. And like, no, let's not do that at all.
Let's not.
But yeah, so obviously just the biggest, clearest cut pick of all, which all the names that we've read so far and the names that we're going to go over, that really says something, but that just speaks to his brilliance and his sheer dominance.
Now, joining him at defensive end is another local product and someone that, may be overshadowed by just the out of this world statistics and accomplishments by Terrell Suggs. But this guy really did some incredible things at Arizona State during his time in a Sun Devil uniform from 05 to 09. And that's Dexter Davis. Started all 50 games of his ASU career, which at the time was a school record, and I believe still remains a record, even with the COVID extra eligibility, at least based on some of the players I looked up, because there's a guy that's going to be later on this list that would be the guy that you'd think would break that record. He finished his career 3rd all-time at ASU in career sacks with 31, only behind Terrell Suggs and Shante Carver. Ranks 9th all-time at ASU in career tackles for loss with 45. He was a first team, second team, and honorable mention All Pac-10 recipient during his career. He's a freshman All-American in 2006. Posted back-to-back double-digit sack seasons with 10.5 in 2007 when ASU had 10 wins that year, and he had 11 the next year in 2008. So again, one of these names that, Terrell Suggs is like the no-doubter that even someone who's in kindergarten now probably knows who Terrell Suggs is just based on the lore. Dexter Davis is someone that I hope Sun Devil fans, maybe of a younger age, understand how capable he was when he was here.
Yeah, he was really fun to watch, really explosive coming off the edge. And, what he was able to do in that 07 season was pretty fun. Because like not a whole lot of like double-digit sack seasons, at least in the modern era for the Sun Devil defensive program. But, having him coming off the edge of there and doing it back-to-back, pretty remarkable for some really fun teams.
And so we've got our 2 defensive ends. We're going to select 2 interior defensive linemen as well. We talked about Suggs having a lengthy NFL career. This guy just wrapped up his NFL career, and man, did he turn that into something. He was a big-time recruit coming to ASU from the state of Nevada, played for the Devils from 2008 to 2010, and that's Lawrence Guy. He was a 3-time honorable mention All Pac-10 honors recipient, a freshman All-American in 2008, team leader in sacks in 2009. Over his career, he played in 35 games with 31 starts, had 122 tackles, 23 tackles for loss, 8 sacks. His pro career was really something because he was a 7th round pick. And for the first few years, just kind of, really trying to make it in the league. But man, when he caught on, especially when he got to New England. He was named to the Patriots all 2010s, all decade team. He was a Super Bowl champion, did some great things in the community. So his story is really something compelling. Of someone, I'm not going to say, rags to riches or nothing to something, because he was a major college football player and a 4-star recruit and an NFL draft pick. But as far as someone that, of the people who are drafted that late and don't play a ton in their early years. I would say they don't have the longevity on many occasions that Lawrence Guy had in the NFL. So you really have to give him credit for the perseverance that he had to last in the league that long and put together an incredible career.
Just the story, even before that, you've just come into Tempe, had some football accolades, but had some learning differences that he had to overcome, and put in the work on the field, but also behind the scenes, off the field. By the time he wrapped up, he earned scholar baller status, so that was really cool to see, the perseverance. Then yeah, I believe when he left, with declared early, a lot of folks, myself included, was like, "What? Are you sure? I mean, maybe one more year might help you out a little bit." Just snuck in that final round of the draft, bounced around a couple teams in the early part of his career. Had some success, unfortunately, with Baltimore again. But then, then he tormented me again for several years as a New England Patriot, having great success, earning a Super Bowl ring, a 13-year career or something along those lines. Really, and just also one of the best human beings that this school has produced. What the Lawrence Guy Family Foundation does, and has done for years, is really, really cool to see. Just kind of the true definition of a Sun Devil on and off the field.
Yeah, I think he was at least on an NFL roster even up until a part of last season based on the internet. And that's just, it's so wild when you think of that and you're like, man, he was here in like the early-ish, like Dennis Erickson time. We talk about like 25 years seeming like a long time ago. Even that, feels like a while ago, 15 or so years ago. So man, just a lot of time spent in the NFL. Moving on to our next interior defensive line pick. If it weren't for Terrell Suggs, we would certainly be talking about this guy as the most dominant defender in this era and one of the most dominant defenders in the history of Sun Devil football. And he still deserves to be talked about in that light. And that, of course, is Will Sutton. Was in the Sun Devil program for 2009 to 2013. Had a year that he was actually, I believe, academically ineligible, if I'm not mistaken, in 2010. So again, talking like kind of like Lawrence Guy, or even a guy like Jamil Douglas, who we're adding as like an honorable mention. These players who maybe go through some hurdles over the course of their career, but end on a tremendously high note. Back to back Pac-12 Pat Tillman Defensive Player of the Year in 2012 and 2013. Back-to-back Morris Trophy recipient, and of course, first team All Pac-12 honors recipient in 2012 and 13. He was a consensus All-American in 2012, first team All-American again in 2013. He ranks 8th all-time at ASU in sacks and tackles for loss. He had 13 sacks and 23 and a half tackles for loss in 2012. Both still stand as the 4th best single-season output in ASU history. He's just somebody that, my goodness, what he did for those 2 seasons and among the others, I mean, we're giving Todd Graham and his staff a lot of credit here in this retrospect because there's just a list of guys that between the 2011 and 2012 seasons with that coaching change, whatever it was about, the scheme, the coaching, whatever clicked, that their careers, went from a certain level to something skyrocketing into the stratosphere. And I think Will Sutton is really the champion of that group, a Hall of Famer himself. So I just think about especially that 2012 season and similar to Suggs, he was just unstoppable. Every time he was out there, he just put it all together. He had great, hand and footwork, just completely tenacious and aggressive. He won a game at Utah by picking off a pass at the line of scrimmage. I'll never forget, the highlight of his career in my eyes might not even been like a defensive play. Just the tail end of that Wisconsin game, the craziest ending you might ever
any
seen.
Sun Devils ever ran.
When that clock was 0, watch it. Watch Will Sutton, and he's running something like a 2.540 wall to wall, celebrating the win as many of us were in that crazy moment against the Badgers. Will Sutton, again, just a great, great dude. Someone that came in from that Corona Centennial High School pipeline. He was a decently rated recruit, but I think he was a little undersized at the time. But man, did he grow into the position, went on to an NFL career and a little bit with the Hot Shots in the old AAF, if you recall, played at Sun Devil Stadium. But man, yeah, it was fun to watch Will Sutton play. And as we said about, Scott Peters and many others on this list, so very fortunate that he was playing for the good guys because, man, you'd respect it, but you'd hate it to have to play against him.
Sweet T. Willie. Just very fun. And just right about the time I started covering the team, it was his emergence, coming back off that academic year, overcame those hurdles in the classroom and just, started to really flash and then ultimately became one of the most dominant defenders in the latter stages of the Pac-12's history. Really fun guy, and just kind of one of those like kind of defining images is you see just the emotion with those heartbeat type of players. He'd rip off the helmet, be screaming, the hair be flying back a little bit. Kind of teaming up with a guy we'll talk about here in a second, but just being that disruptive force in the middle was really such that those first couple of years of Todd Graham defense before it became something else was really a fun, just aggressive attacking, all those kind of cliches that any new coach says, oh, our defense is going to be like this. Well, that actually was in those like 2012, 13, 14 type of seasons, and those first couple of years really were driven by Will Sutton.
So that's our 4-man defensive line. Again, on the edges, you've got Terrell Suggs, Dexter Davis. Doesn't get any easier for opponents on the inside with Lawrence Guy, Will Sutton. Best of luck running the ball and keeping your quarterback upright. It ain't going to work. So now we've identified a rush linebacker, and we're also going to have a few, traditional linebackers as well. You alluded to him a moment ago, and this is another guy at top of that list that in that era when Todd Graham showed up, his career trajectory really accelerated. Just someone that was a versatile player and just a beast behind the line of scrimmage. That's Carl Bradford. Played for the Sun Devils from 2010 to 2013. He's 7th all-time at Arizona State in career sacks with 21.5, 10th in career tackles for loss with 43. He had that incredible 2-year run in 2012 and 2013. He had 81 tackles, 20.5 for loss, 11.5 sacks in 2012. Followed that up with 61 tackles with 19 for loss with 8.5 sacks in 2013. Went on to become an NFL draft pick. Just that 2-year deal. And I think he came in as like a fullback, if I'm not mistaken.
High school fullback.
Yeah. He played at Norco High School in California that at that time produced some sensational players, the Toby Gerhardts, the Garth Gerhardts, the DeAndre Lewis of the world. He was a second-team All-Pac-12 pick in 2013. Again, we're talking about players from an era, and we can't leave off a guy who had his own era. That was a thing. Remember the Carl Bradford era? That was a deal for a hot minute there. But his whole career, but especially that 2-year pairing of 2012 and 2013, man, he was something special, screaming off the edges there.
Yeah, when Todd Graham laid out the defense, and you look on the depth chart and the devil backer, and it's like, well, what the hell is this? Is it just some like marketing ploy or whatever? Let's zhuzh up something. No, like he lived up to the name. Just that the hair flowing behind him as he's chasing down quarterbacks. That kind of great picture of him, kind of almost like literally flying through the air behind what was it?
I think Matt Barkley.
Yeah, and just obviously putting up ridiculous numbers, and then after what any given TFL that Will Sutton or Bradford made, doing the little arm interlocking jumping celebration, man, it was just, that was such a disruptive dynamic duo. I think we sat down with both of them, right? In the
I would have been the 13, back when we were at the old media day in 2013. Seems like ages ago, and I think we did like duos for most of them. Like Stephon Martin and Chris Young. Might have to go back and dial that one up from the old archives there. But
Jalen Strong and Eric Lauderdale.
Gosh, that
something like that.
That might have been it. That might have been it for sure. Some of the coaches too. Yeah, I think we had Bo and Todd Graham, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So dial that up in the archives and get some prophetic things from 12 years ago about the careers that we're now honoring. Talking about honoring somebody, as far as someone who just barely missed the cut, but deserves to be mentioned. That's Antonio Longino. I mean, the 2015 season that he had was something special. It was wild. I felt like he deserved to be the conference defensive player of the year, and I think he's like an honorable mention selection. There are a few years in Sun Devil football history where I don't know if it was some pettiness by other coaching staffs or things like that, that ASU players didn't get what they deserved in terms of those all-conference teams. I know we've been referencing them a lot. There are some seasons where justice is not served, but Tony Longino, man, when he got things going that season, that was something special.
Yeah, he was really a fierce player in that 2015 season. I believe over 20 TFLs, double-digit sacks there. Also, I want to shout out Chris Young from playing with that spur position, that kind of hybrid backer safety spot. Just a guy who was consistently in the backfield. Only 2 years here in Tempe as a JUCO transfer, but like Longino, Young guys who put together some really disruptive seasons. Again, kind of just speaks to the quality that we're dealing with here. Because I mean, man, when you talk about what the impact Carl Bradford did, I mean, he's that's something you just can't beat.
Huge Chris Young fan. I've actually seen him around a few times in recent years. Awesome guy. Just man, if you think back to 2013, just to kind of put a punctuation mark on him and how both of us and I view him, 2013, Will Sutton was picked as the Pac-12's Pat Tillman Defensive Player of the Year. I am highly confident, going off memory, that I picked Chris Young as ASU's defensive MVP because of the year he had. Unbelievable stuff. That's that game against UCLA to clinch the South Division. He terrorized Brett Hundley, I believe, to help ASU win that tight game. So moving on to the traditional linebackers, and this could be a position group where maybe we see some discussion in the social medias. So if y'all are listening to this, and if our answers here make you think, I don't agree with these guys, let us know about it. Or if you agree, hey, holler at us. So we're going to go through the names that were picked, and then we'll give you the big one that was left off, though the process of elimination, might highlight that on its own. But we're going to start with a no-doubter. He was the 2005 co-recipient of the Pat Tillman Defensive Player of the Year award in the Pac-10 conference, along with Haloti Ngata, who went on to some very good things. This guy was just so outstandingly violent. Man, he was like a linebacker from the 70s playing in the early 2000s. Someone that just had some of the most ferocious hits that I've ever seen at Arizona State. That's the manimal, Dale Robinson. 2005, he had 115 tackles, 15 for loss, 4 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries. Even played a little bit of defensive end. 2004, his first year coming to ASU from the JUCO ranks, 93 tackles, 13 for loss, 4.5 sacks, a fumble recovery, and interception. So, he's got over 200 tackles across 2 years. He was obviously a first-team all-conference selection in 2005 since he was the co-winner of the Defensive Player of the Year award. Honorable mention in 2004. Just one of those guys that from the gates, from the moment he first strapped on a maroon and gold helmet with Sparky on the side, he just made it a point to take out every bit of aggression he's ever had in his life out on every opposing player, and that was a great thing for Sun Devil fans to see.
You start with the great elite nickname there, but also just one of those backers I remember, just like loud hits, like merciless hits, just like the hit like you said, like the 70s. Like this is like Jack Lambert, leveling guys, Dick Butkus just destroying ball carriers. This is the same violence that Dale brought to those kind of mid 2000s Sun Devil teams, and just really, really fun to watch. And talk about a few players that maybe you just wish that they're able to have a little bit longer careers and it's more time in Tempe. But man, he's certainly made those couple years count.
Again, somebody that you're glad to be on your side. He was a lot of fun to watch. The guys that were playing at ASU in the time that I was in college, I'm not saying from a biased perspective, but I just hold some really special memories because, when you're a student there and you're watching that happen, you're really getting into it. Those guys really, really stand out to you. So moving along to another one. And we're not yet at the point of controversy, even with this selection. Man, you need to get fired up. You need some energy in your life. If you need a shot of adrenaline in human form, give this guy a call. You know him, you love him. We've had him on for so many, pre-territorial cup, locker room pump up speeches. Of course, our guy, B. Magee, Brandon Magee at ASU from 2008 to 2012. In 2012, his senior year, team high 113 tackles, second team all Pac-12 that season. Honorable mention in 2010. Missed all of 2011. He had an Achilles injury in practice. These were days where it's been a very, very long time since I regularly attended ASU football practices, but at the time I actually did, and I was at that practice, sadly, when Brandon Magee hurt his foot. And to say that the energy was sucked out of the city of Tempe because this was an outdoor practice is an understatement, because just it was such a somber thing. And that kind of speaks not only to the athletic ability that he had and has, I'm sure, but also just the impact he had on the team, the leadership that he had on this team. Bounced back with a vengeance in that 2012 season. Of course, played professional baseball and football in the minor leagues for baseball, made it to the NFL as well. Moving on to like a Hollywood career, that sort of thing. So just a well-rounded dude, just a great, great guy. And to this day, as much energy and as much enthusiasm for Sun Devil football as it'll get. And as we know from the unforgettable quote that will last in Sun Devil lore for all of time, he doesn't think too terribly highly of those Arizona Wildcats. Just extra points for B. Magee.
On that short list of like people who hate the Cats the most, like Eno's on that list, McGee's on that list. Danny White's on that list. Like
the Mount Rushmore of Wildcat haters. I mean, those are probably 3 or 4 right there for sure.
And just of course his ability as a linebacker, being able to be stout against the run, sideline to sideline, drop back into coverage, but also one of those heart and soul type of guys, a heartbeat type of players. What he meant, and kind of in that transition from the Erickson era to that new era, and just kind of helping be that bridge to a more successful, brighter future, and kind of kicking off that 3-season run of success for the Devils, and just obviously the legacy he's brought in off the field is one of the guy who just absolutely bleeds maroon and gold. Just one of the all-time favorite players to cover in modern Sun Devil history.
All right, moving on to our third linebacker.
Here we go.
And this could be where some controversy comes about. This was a highly regarded recruit out of the state of California, a guy who could lay some hat on the opponents. But it may not be that California recruit who can hit that you think it may be. But it's a guy that when we talk about the numbers, these numbers don't lie. That's Salamo Fiso, who we're picking for this spot at linebacker. He was in the Sun Devil program from 2012 to 2016. Here are the numbers. So digest them and take them into consideration, and you'll understand why we made this selection, even if it's a little controversial. He ranks 4th all-time at Arizona State with 204 solo tackles. No one else in the top 5 has played at Arizona State since 1992. So that kind of shows you that it's not too common that guys get 200 or more career solo tackles, because outside of him, 30-plus years have passed since anybody else has really done it. He also ranks 11th all-time at Arizona State with 41 career tackles for loss. You happen to know who is tied for 12th in that category at Arizona State? That would be Pat Tillman. So this guy's just a notch above, of course, the American hero there. Could have been higher in some of these rankings. He missed 5 games of his senior season in 2016. 2015 really jumped off the charts. He really started to make a name for himself as a redshirt freshman in 2013 when he entered the starting lineup, kind of at a somewhat midway point of the season for ASU's team that went on that magical run in 2013. But a couple years later, he had 99 tackles, including 20 tackles for loss in 2015. He was a 2-time honorable mention all Pac-12 pick. So this is someone that has a full body of work of top tier productivity. And when you're in the, top 5, top 10 to 12 in some major key categories, and the others that you're surrounded by are ones from decades ago, that warrants selection, even if it may not have been, someone that was, a name that jumped off the page compared to some others. Again, definitely deserving of this accolade.
Yeah, this is definitely, I think, going to be the one that stirs up some controversy, and I think that it's a name that people just may associate with that 15 season where the defense was kind of sliding off, the 2016 where the defense was kind of like a disaster. Obviously, I think that was the year they were like worst in the pass defense in the country by a wide margin. So I think that might color some people's memories and perception. But in that front 6, front 7 of that Sun Devil defense, there was a guy doing everything he could to keep the opposing offense in check. And yeah, Fiso was just one of those guys, kind of never a colorful soundbite, but just consistently just filled up the stat sheet. And it's kind of one of those linebackers that just kind of did a little bit of everything. Post high sack total, the aggressive and the explosiveness to get behind line of scrimmage and chase the quarterbacks and stop running backs in their tracks. And just, yeah, when you look up just kind of the all encompassing body of work, I mean, it's not the flashiest, but sometimes you just need those backers that just gets the job done in that blue collar type of way, and Fiso fit that bill.
Yeah, a hard hat guy, no frills kind of guy, but put up numbers consistently over the course of his career. Again, despite the fact that he missed just about half of his senior season due to injury. Now, of course, the guy that, folks might wonder, why in the world did you leave him off the list? Heck, I know that when we did our all-decade team a few years ago, and I left this upcoming player off my list, I actually got a little social media attention from another player that's on this list who played in high school with them. Like, why did you leave him off? And that, of course, is Vontaze Burfict. And, Vontaze Burfict, it will probably always be like the most enigmatic, player that I can think of, for Arizona State. He did achieve, high tier things. especially in that sophomore season he had in 2010. Obviously, he was the conference defensive freshman of the year in 2009. Things just didn't take shape in 2011. Obviously, things went downhill to the point to where I think he got benched or his role was reduced. Things kind of trickled out there in those waning days of the Dennis Erickson regime. And he'll always, I think, be associated, right or wrong, with just kind of the Dennis Erickson era and how things just went off track, and a lack of discipline and control and that sort of thing when it comes to penalties and that sort of deal. Things, again, these are not necessarily biased opinions. You just look at the tape and what happened. We saw those games. So an elitely talented player, someone that on physical gifts alone and more than just flashes, showed to be in that conversation with a Will Sutton, who was ironically a high school teammate of Burfict, or a Terrell Suggs. It just wasn't the full body of work. So if we're talking about the other three guys that we listed at these positions, we stand by the picks. If Burfict had a better 2011 season, then that could have changed some things. If he would have really followed that trajectory he got in 2010, I think there were some magazines that had him like an All-American and things like that in 2010. That could have been a better deal there. So he was like just the last one, the first one left off, but just not quite there, because when we have these other candidates, you got a guy like Dale Robinson, he was the conference defensive player of the year. You can't leave him off. Brandon Magee, between what he did on the field and the leader that he was, you got to include him. And as we talked about with Fiso, when you look at those statistics and how they stack up over time and how they still stand in Sun Devil lore here about 10 years later, it's crazy to think a guy like Salamo Fiso's been out of Sun Devil football for a decade. That warrants his inclusion as well. So Burfict, he had a good to above average career. I think it should be considered a compliment in a weird way that he didn't achieve nearly what he's capable of. A guy like, Vontaze Burfict should have been a multiple-time All-American and a Hall of Famer in Sun Devil athletics. And he ended up having a shortly star-studded NFL career, but there were obviously some of the old habits that reared their head, during his pro career. A Steeler fan knows very well about that. So again, a good career there, above average, deserves to be in the conversation. But I think too much was left back to have him be, right there on the list with these guys.
I always equate him with Kalen Ballage as guys who just didn't do poorly, didn't have bad careers.
Both made it to the NFL.
Both
had their achievements. And I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying.
And but just for their talents and their potential, didn't make enough. And maybe that's unfair to a degree of like holding them to a hypothetical and having a standard that perhaps shouldn't exist and just judge them on what they should have done. But the flashes, I mean, this isn't just like, recruiting ranking, though. This is kind of what you alluded to, like as a freshman in that sophomore season, just what we saw, what's the capability. I mean, he might be the hardest hitter on this list. That poor Idaho State quarterback is still buried in the turf
in game one. Yeah.
In Tempe. But then you also look at just the last, 5-6 games, 2011, when the wheels just came off after that, 5-1, 6-2 start or something along those lines.
They needed one win to clinch the division among like the last half of the season, and sadly couldn't make it happen. Yeah.
But and just like got to the point where the flags were coming almost on reputation rather than hit. Just like he's in the vicinity, he probably did something wrong. That's a whole nother Pac-12 refs discussion. But the times that he was detrimental to the defense, I wouldn't say we're the majority, but they were not. They can't be ignored.
And you think of that Stanford game here against Andrew Luck, and ASU had a very good chance of winning that game, but there were penalties that prolonged drives for Stanford again, and at a time when ASU was really trying to get back into winning ways. Yeah, those things, they happen, and that's a factor.
So a guy in the Hall of Good, the Hall of Very Good, however you view that linebacker play, but yeah, it's gonna definitely, I think, could be the most commented upon pick or I guess non-pick of the list.
Yeah, and the conversation with him and Kalen Ballage too, because again, I think of those two in different ways, but similar category. Again, in a way, it's a compliment. It's like if you're in a sales job and you're one of the better salespeople at your job, and you're wondering why your manager, your boss is saying, I'm not happy with your performance, this month, this quarter. Like, what are you talking about? I'm still up here with some of the best. Like, yeah, but you're capable of so much more. Like, you are selling yourself short, even if you're still among the better, the best of your peers. You are not actualizing your potential. So again, a bit of a compliment there. Those guys went on to NFL careers, and that's a great thing for them, great thing for Sun Devil football. Obviously, these are not like personal beefs that we have with any sort of people like that. But again, that one name alone, because anytime we do these, we do tend to have them right on the outside looking in, and invariably it does create some discussion, and that's totally warranted because there are people that see it differently, and I get that. And there are folks that played with him and have known him for years who enter those conversations. And that's a cool thing. I like to engage in that sort of thing. And we fully expect it to come our way through this. Now, then another name that falls into that not eligible category. And this is probably one of the top few that, if he were eligible, he would be on the list. And that's Adam Archuleta. That's a tough one there because he only played, his last season was 2000. He was the conference defensive player of the year, but he only played in 2000. So again, sticking by the rules. That's a tough omission for him. But that linebacker group, including their rush linebacker of Carl Bradford, we got Dale Robinson, Brandon Magee, and Salamo Fiso. That's a good group right there. So we're going to move along into the secondary, and these secondary positions probably had the toughest decisions like internally for Brad and me to decide on. And there were like a couple general no-brainers, and then some others, again, some of these picks are like 55-45 or 51-49 in terms of selecting one player over another. It's clear cut in some cases, but not all. So we will start at the cornerback position. And the first one up, if there were a Mount Rushmore or an all-time team of recruiting commitment videos, this guy's first ballot Hall of Famer, and by a wide margin, unanimously so. Came to ASU with very high expectations in 2007 and really jumped into things right away. He was an honorable mention All-American in 2008 after being a freshman All-American in that 2007 season. Of course, we're talking about Omar Bolden, who was with the Devils from 2007 to 2011. First team All Pac-10 in 2010, ASU's team leader in interceptions that year. Also an incredible kick returner. We do have those categories coming up. He's not our chosen kick returner, but he had 2 career kick returns for touchdown. That's second best in Sun Devil history. He did great and warrants this selection on its own, but you got to think also kind of what could have been because, I mean, he missed the one full season in the better part of another. He only played 4 games in 2009, missed all of 2011. He and Brandon Magee, I mean, that 2011 season was snake bit. I mean, that's one of those you almost got to do like a documentary special on that 2011 season for Sun Devil football. 4th round pick of the Broncos, had a solid career there. I believe he was on that Super Bowl winning team as well. Just a ultra athletic guy when you get the ball in his hands. I remember that interception return he had for a touchdown as a freshman at Stanford, where it was like, that's his coming out party, because it took a bit for him to get in the starting lineup, but I think that game, that pick maybe gave him the confidence, or the confidence was instilled in the coaching staff on his behalf. It was off to the races from there. Omar Bolden, just a real good defensive back, and in a tough time for Sun Devil football, but he was a star.
Yeah, absolutely. And just seeing him, really finally got it all together, was healthy, was on the field, and that 2010 season specifically, really fun to watch him play and just kind of lock down the opposing receivers in terms of that. Also, the kick returns were fun. It was the Wisconsin on the road. Had that score there. Good NFL career. Also a positive guy. That was the hashtag positive living was his thing.
Like in the early days of Twitter. Yeah, for sure.
And so, just had the cool aesthetic too. I had the visor. He just kind of looked the part of like the lockdown corner. And then when he's on the field, he played the part. But yeah, that 2011, that's going to be the alternate branching, Doc Brown timeline of what could have been.
Like 2011 Sun Devil football, 2020 Sun Devil baseball, there, and even like, that 2019, 2020 basketball. Yeah, there are some seasons we can identify that a couple things, a few butterfly flecks, the flap their wings in a different direction, and things go a world of difference for Sun Devil football. So Omar Bolden at one of the cornerbacks. A little bit of debate on the second one, but the pick we landed on is very deserving for sure. And I mean, this guy meant a ton to the program. He's got some accolades about him, or some achievements that he participated in, that I don't know if they can ever be matched. We're talking about yet another hometown hero, of course, from Chandler High School. proud Sun Devil, proud Arizona native. We're talking about our guy, Chase Lucas, in the program from 2016 to 2021. Of course, the extra eligibility due to that COVID season. He was a 2-time second-team All Pac-12 member, 1-time honorable mention, started 49 games. That's what I was thinking about with Dexter Davis, because I think he got to 50. So Chase Lucas, I think, fell one start shy of Dexter Davis's record. 53 games played, 49 starts, 223 career tackles, 12 TFLs, 28 pass breakups, 6 interceptions. And then the record, he's one of the, numerous players on the team, but I mean, this distinction that he has is, man, it's, as Danny White would say, what, an argument ender, if I'm not mistaken. Other than the redshirt season 2016, when he wasn't playing, he never lost to the University of Arizona, beat them 5 straight times from 2017 through 2021. I mean, that, again, if you want to have any arguments with that guy about the Territorial Cup rivalry, you better get ready for a mouthful, because he's going to give it to you. Obviously, he was a 7th-round draft pick in 2022 by Detroit, now with the San Francisco 49ers, still in the NFL. Came here, with N'Keal Harry in that 2016 recruiting class. Tried to do the New Devil's Order deal. I love a good pro wrestling reference. But Chase Lucas, just the heart and soul of this program during that time period.
Yeah, and so that's another, I think, huge aspect of his inclusion here, just in terms of what he meant on the field, and obviously some interesting years near the end, at least in retrospect, in terms of teams that were trying to reach some heights. But his career, like, he put in the hard work and had to learn some lessons and to put in some years to develop. But when he got there, he became one of the best DBs in the conference, and obviously, by his inclusion here, one of the best in program history, and just what he was able to do on and off the field. But yeah, you go 5-0 against the U of A. I mean, boom.
Yeah. And he's someone that, you look at his resume, and when he came to ASU out of Chandler High, I believe he was primarily an offensive player in high school. And so him playing quarterback at ASU, he redshirted in 2016, but that was a new thing. And I believe he was a second-team all-conference honoree his redshirt freshman year. So he really jumped right into things, and again, it's just somebody that you love to have on your sides. So Chase Lucas, Omar Bolden are your cornerbacks. Moving along in the secondary, we picked 3 safeties. Again, some tough calls here. We'll break down, kind of the honorable mention guys, after we run through these 3. So starting off again, chronologically, this dude was just a playmaker. I don't know that I've ever seen a player on defense who was such a threat to score when he's playing defense. He scored more touchdowns as a defender than a lot of guys do on offense. This is Troy Nolan. He was on the roster from 2006 to 2008. He was injured in 2006 and redshirted. And then in 2007, again, kind of like we're talking about the changing of the guard with Todd Graham and how that created careers for guys like Carl Bradford, Will Sutton, and others. When things changed from Dirk Cutter to Dennis Erickson, Troy Nolan was a guy that really, really benefited. He was a second-team All Pac-10 pick both seasons he played at ASU. He is ASU's all-time leader with 4 pick sixes. He also had a fumble recovery return for a touchdown. He has 5 career defensive touchdowns. He had 2 pick sixes each year he played, which ties ASU's single-season record. So he's tied his own record there. He came to ASU from the junior college ranks. He had his seasons were almost like mirror images of one another. He had the 2 pick sixes. He had 64 tackles exactly, both in 2007 and 2008. 4.5 career TFLs, 13 pass breakups. He was a 7th-round pick of the Houston Texans there in the 2009 NFL draft. Just somebody, again, that was not highly heralded, just one of those players that gets in the starting lineup, and when he got an opportunity, he made the absolute most of it. And very quickly in 2007, you just saw this guy was dangerous. Like, anytime the ball is in the air, he is a threat to just pick it and run it the distance. And it was an exciting thing to watch.
Really, really very exciting, being that threat to make the huge splash plays, but also a guy that was also, I think, pretty consistent in terms of, not allowing the big plays to, get over him. He's playing safety, you're kind of the back line of that defense. And, some guys that, that have, those lofty, pick numbers. Well, actually, that's kind of as a result of, maybe take some chances and getting burned a lot. But Troy Nolan, steady performer, second team all conference, you mentioned both years, but also just the difference maker, those big plays that change the outcomes of games. Man, there's few that were ever better.
And now the next safety is someone that, falls under that no-brainer category. Played at ASU from 2013, 2014. Started off very, very well, but that 2014 season, something very, very special. Of course, we're talking about Damarious Randall, came to ASU from Mesa Community College. Honorable mention All-American and first-team All-Pac-12 in 2014. That season, he was ASU's leader in tackles with 106 and led the team with 3 interceptions. He had 87 solo tackles. That ties for 7th all-time in a single season at ASU. And, for a defensive back who ultimately became more of a cornerback at the professional level, that is something remarkable there. 2013, his previous season, I think it took a couple games for him to really get integrated into the lineup. But when he was really getting it done. He was ended up tied for 3rd on the team with 71 tackles. So he had 177 tackles across 2 seasons at ASU. Talking about playmakers and Troy Nolan, a guy that could take it the distance. Man, did Damarious have a couple of the most unforgettable pick sixes you'll ever see. Starting with the one off BJ Denker against the U of A in 2013. And then, of course, his pick 6 against Notre Dame in 2014 in that unforgettable game. Special stuff. Of course, he was a 1st-round pick in 2015 of Green Bay. He was the first true Sun Devil defensive back to be picked in the 1st round since 1995 at that time. So someone that just really made the most out of the time that he had at Arizona State. Again, very good in 2013, but then that last year that he had for the Devils, he was one of the absolute best defensive backs in the country.
That pick 6 against U of A in 2013, I talked to him about that play, and he knew it was coming. He did the film study. He knew, and you watch that play, you see and watch him before the snap. He is fired up. He knows it's coming. He's pointing. He's getting the defense ready, and then obviously makes that pick. I think later on, later that winter during the basketball season, Denker tried to tweet something negative about ASU basketball, and then Randall had a great tweet dunking on him. We're like, "Why are you talking? We blew you out this year."
There you go. You love when those rivalries don't die, and especially when somebody's moved on to the NFL. You could think it's that's small potatoes. I'm going to the league, but you love to see that pettiness. I'm all about that.
Yeah, and obviously such a difference maker back there, and with Randall and Jordan Simone and that 2014 backline, that was just really fun to see. I mean, that might be like an all-time pairing there, but just the dynamic playmaker, and not just he wasn't the biggest guy, but that didn't stop him from being hard note and throwing his body around and making some big tackles. And to this day, I think he had an unheralded heads up play to set up the Jail Mary, where he let that running back score.
That was him. Okay, yeah.
Because his speed, he had the angle to get him, but you see him pull off a little bit. And I don't think that was because he's being lazy. I think that was
coming up lame or hurt or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I have not asked him about, but to this day, I think that was a heady move because it did ultimately leave ASU enough time to mount the historic comeback.
There you go. And so now our third guy, a recent pick. You talk about someone that, may not have this superstar size for the position, but not letting that slow him down. And for this guy, don't let the lack of postseason accolades fool you one bit. This is someone that, again, played very recently, the last 2 seasons. Of course, we're talking about Shamari Simmons. Meant so much to this program. The team MVP in 2023, defensive MVP in 2024. Just a stat filler there. And Brad, I know we all and we both have guys that are very good players, but they just resonate with us in a stronger level. Like for me, I think about guys like a Ryan Terrain or a Keith Poole, maybe even like a Terry Richardson, that they're very good and even to elite players, but just something about them just really puts them a notch above for me personally. And Dale Robinson, throw that on the list as well. I know that Shamari Simmons is a guy that you're just a huge fan of. What is it about what Shamari did these 2 years at Arizona State that really stand out to you?
He, like the cliche goes, oh, that guy left everything out there. Shamari Simmons left everything he had, and he left a lot of what offensive players had on the field as well. Just going through a difficult year, obviously making the rise up through the FCS level and making that jump up. And then going through a 2023 season that was very difficult for a number of reasons. Never lost faith, was voted team MVP during a difficult year, was flying around, had no regard for his body, but just a very heady player, a very physical player, and not the most vocal guy in that locker room, but like one of those guys who's like the words maybe weren't numerous, but what he did say mattered. And then of course 2014, being selfless, moving from safety to nickel, and after Mason Williams left the team, and just absolutely was a difference maker. You saw in the bowl game against Texas, the defense struggling. He comes in, immediate fire plug there, helps get the safety. Just that obviously that we can litigate that targeting call in the Big 12 title game to the end of time, but just his like controlled recklessness, but also just a very heady, smart player. He thread that needle, which is very difficult to do as a defender. And yeah, obviously the inside that locker room with what you said, the lack of postseason honors, and I think the Pac-12 and the Big 12 folks swung and missed there.
And it's somewhat understandable in 2023 because if a team is really struggling, then that's probably going to make some voters think differently. But when you win the conference and your defensive MVP gets nothing, that is just an egregious error, and there's no other way to describe it.
Exactly. But then like the fact that his teammates and the folks in that locker room, the day in, the day out, held him in such esteem, that's the postseason honor I think matters the most. And just a guy who, again, kind of, we've seen a number of these guys 2 years, but just were foundational, critical pieces that swung the pendulum of Sun Devil football from kind of wandering the desert to now on this kind of rocket ship trajectory.
And again, we mentioned this before, kind of like in Evan Finkenberg, you love to see the story and how he went from a JUCO player to an FCS player to a team that was just mired in controversy and mediocrity to be kind about it, to just that unbelievable shift from 2023 to 2024, being able to experience that and be a critical part of that. Talked about him being a stat book filler. 2023, 12 games. He had 73 tackles to lead ASU, a tackle and a half for loss, a sack, an interception, 6 pass breakups, 4 quarterback hurries, 2 fumble recoveries. Last year, kind of the Troy Nolan thing. If my numbers are right, he had 73 tackles exactly again, 99 for loss, 4 forced fumbles, 4 pass breakups, 4 quarterback hurries, an interception, and that safety. So a guy that is just, a jack of all trades, doing everything at different positions within the secondary and not missing a beat there. He's somebody that even though he went undrafted, wouldn't shock you if he sticks around in the league for a while. Just someone that, didn't know what you got when he chose to transfer to ASU. Like, okay, this got a decent FCS career. Yeah. ASU's kind of, struggling. So they're taking transfers, maybe a risk on somebody. No, it certainly did not prove to be any measure of a risk whatsoever or anything like that. A guy that was just a incredible defender, will be sorely missed. You kind of think of it in a similar light of like that Oregon game years ago when Merlin Robertson had his great true freshman season and he had a targeting call that kept him out for the first half. And immediately when he gets in the lineup, the game changes. And if he would have played that whole game, ASU wins that ball game. And, hate the what if on that Peach Bowl, but if Shamari's in there for the entirety of that ball game, wonder if things would have been different for the Devils. So that's our secondary. Omar Bolden, Chase Lucas at cornerback, Troy Nolan, Damarious, Randall, Shamari, Simmons at the safety positions. A handful across the board in the secondary that missed the cut. So we're going to list some names here because as Brad and I were putting these teams together, I would say we just on a first swing agreed upon, 90% of the team, whatever the numbers come out to, but just a few of these secondary guys, it was just some very tough calls. So to give these guys their due, kind of in chronological order as far as when they played at ASU, mixing up the safeties and corners, starting with Ricardo Stewart, played in those first few seasons of the 21st century. Just a guy that it's interesting to see when you contrast the athlete and the human being, such a great human being, a spiritual presence. I think he's played that role in the Sun Devil football program, a great leader on the football field. It's violence and viciousness. He was a multiple-time all-conference performer. Jason Shivers, that's another guy on the list of just like, that's one of my guys, man, because he was a freshman coming out of South Mountain High School, 2001. That was when I started college. So I remember just watching him under Dirk Cutter. He had I think over 100 tackles all 3 years he played, just a hugely productive safety. Justin Tryon was a JUCO teammate at Troy Nolan, really good corner here in 2006, 2007. Osahan Irbor, man, he was someone that, again, if you don't remember him, if you don't know him, get to know him because he was such a good corner and a guy that just, reckless abandon. I remember he was getting a bunch of TFLs and attacking the backfield and that sort of thing. Alden Darby, that's a name. That was one that for me was probably the next guy up. You know, if we went with 4 safeties, it would have been him. It was a really tough call, you know, to cut him out. I want to be really honest about that. That might be the toughest cut of all. I was going to ask you, like, what was your absolute toughest cut? I would say Alden Darby for me. Great story. You know, like a 2-star recruit. One of those guys that I think was only added to the, you know, the signing list late in the game. Just, you know, just not somebody that's in these top 100 lists in the 4 or 5-star blue chippers, things like that. But by the end of his Sun Devil career, he had surpassed a lot of those guys that were recruited well above him. When he was wrapping up his high school career as a first-team all-conference player, an integral piece of those highly successful teams in the early Todd Graham era. Got to throw out our guy, Jordan Simone, and this is not just a homer pick because he's our boy. He was a hell of a player. He got it done. We got to list him there. And then lastly, among, you know, the possibilities in the secondary, Kobe Williams, especially that last year, man, he was a lockdown corner. You know, he was very undersized, but played like he was about 6 inches taller than he was. You know, as good of a defender as ASU had at that time. So he's certainly worth mentioning there. As you can tell by that list, for those of you who've been following Sun Devil football for these last 25 years, we could have gone a lot of different directions and had just as credible a list as we did with the ones that we picked.
Yeah, 2 guys for me that really that were tough. You know, you mentioned Darby. For me, it was like, you know, Earmore and Kobe Williams. You look at their careers, and you know, if you're a casual fan or perhaps not an ASU fan, just looking at some box scores or stat sheets, you don't see a whole lot there. But I think that's one of those things where they were so good at their job, so good in coverage, that they didn't necessarily get thrown at a whole lot. And, you know, Kobe Williams, the guy, I think if he's 3 inches taller, he's a draft pick. I believe he's still playing up in Canada as well. You know, Alden Darby, you know, got a couple Grey Cups up there.
Career,
yeah. You know, Osan Iribor, you know, was a very good lockdown corner and developed in just kind of a steady presence. And just, I think those guys are just kind of a little forgotten because they didn't have necessary flashy interception totals or something like that, but just because they were good and they covered their dudes. And so the quarterback didn't throw their way that were way too much. But yeah, I mean, just kind of going over that list, Joe, that's just an abundance of, like, kind of like running back, of just like so many good guys that, you know, you put any of them really kind of in the group, and it's like, good, okay, they're well deserving. But, you know, as we have rules, we have structure, and so there's only a certain amount of spots.
You got to make the tough decisions sometimes. So just to run through the defense, because before we get into special teams, we're doing a full special teams as well. So on the defensive line, your ends are Terrell Suggs, Dexter Davis. Interior is Lawrence Guy and Will Sutton. The rush linebacker there is Carl Bradford. The 3 traditional linebackers are Dale Robinson, Brandon Magee, and Salamo Fiso. In the secondary, you've got Omar Bolden and Chase Lucas at cornerback. And then, as just mentioned, the 3 safeties, Troy Nolan, Damarious Randall, and Shamari Simmons. So let's wrap things up. The final unit that we're going to cover here on this all quarter century team is special teams, starting off with the place kicker. In theory, it should be a tough decision because you had 2 guys that won the Lou Groza Award, but when you have an NCAA record holder, you know, that makes the decision for you. So, of course, we go Zane Gonzalez here from 2013 to 2016, the 2016 Lou Groza Award winner. He was a semifinalist in 2013 and 14, consensus All-American in 2016, 2-time first-team All-Pac-12, 1-time second team. He's by far ASU's all-time leader in career points with 494. The second place is 380. He had 96 career-made field goals. Second place is 81.
Were both of those in Dejas?
I believe so, okay. And at least one of them, but that would make a lot of sense because he was a long-time kicker and an All-American himself.
One of those records, or another of those records that stood for decades.
There you go. Exactly. I mean, he was pretty much the standard bearer at place kicker for decades for ASU, really. He ended his career with 6 FBS kicking records, including the all-time record for field goals made and points by a kicker. Kicked a school record 59-yard field goal in 2016. He had 3 others that year of 53 to 54 yards. You know, Legatron, he was just automatic from when he stepped inside the stadium. Maybe when he got off the plane, he was within his field goal range right there. Still in the NFL. Obviously, he was kind of in the news and for playing for Washington and that sort of thing this past season. I actually ran into him in San Marcos, Texas, because he's a native Texan, and caught up with him because he was watching that game between the Devils and Texas State. That was before he went back in the NFL. So it's kind of interesting to bump into a guy and he's just living life. He's talking about he just bought a house, I think in in that area. And lo and behold, you get picked up and play in the NFL for a bit that year. So, man, what Zane did in such a unique story about it, he was like a 0-star recruit and just barely, was added to the team at kind of a late point, and then just immediately. This isn't somebody who sat for a few years and it clicked at the late stages. I mean, he was just nails from day one and was consistent through his entire career. I mean, there really was, he had obviously better seasons than others, but there was never a point that he really had, down years, so to speak. Just a guy that wall to wall was as reliable as it gets as a place kicker.
Yeah, when you're the best that it's ever done it in the NCAA and the FBS, you're doing something right. And yeah, he was just very consistent. I think what was trying to think of Ralph Amson's nickname for him, like Legasus.
There you go,
or something like that. But yeah, just there
are a lot of nicknames with the leg prefix. Any of them will work.
And yeah, obviously, being one of the best kickers in college football history, regardless of school affiliation. I was there in Colorado when he kicked that 59-yarder, and they're just like, wow. I mean, and then that one I believe had a little bit to spare, but yeah, just great range, great reliability, and hashtag college kickers exist for a reason. But there are certain guys who are very much exceptions to that rule, and Zane was that dude.
Yeah, a lot of either game winners. I remember that Utah game in 2014, or that UTSA game on the road. That was a real tough contest. Go ahead game winners, clutch moments. He did it all. Obviously, we've got to give a shout out to Thomas Weber as well. He was the Groza Award winner in 2007 as a redshirt freshman. Just seemed like that year he could not miss. I mean, that was unbelievable. Had some injury issues. The coaching staff put way too much on him, had him do like double, triple duty. And so, his next couple years were a little challenging, but things bounced back up. He had kind of a redemption game to end his career in 2010 at U of A, that crazy one that, again, that was a hashtag college kicker game if there ever was one. ASU was on the positive side of the place kickers in that regard, as y'all remember James Brooks blocking the 2 extra points there in Tucson. So Thomas Weber, a very, very good career as a Sun Devil as well. But again, when you got the NCAA record holder in Zane Gonzalez, that's the direction you got to go. I don't think too many will challenge that.
Definitely.
At punter, so this is the only, and we didn't do this intentionally. We're not trying to be bitter and exclude players who transferred away from Arizona State, in these last 5 years or so, of transferring and the advent of the transfer portal. The punter is really the lone selection of a guy who chose to depart from ASU. But what he did at Arizona State, number one, he, qualifies with our 15-game thing. I believe he played 17 games at ASU. And this is Michael Turk, if you remember, from 2018 to 2020. Began his career at Lafayette College in 2017, transferred to ASU redshirt in 2018. But then the 2 years, or, the year plus that he played at Arizona State, incredibly memorable stuff. Was that his first game, that Kent State game where he had he averaged 60 yards. He had some
single
crazy
game record. Yeah. The NCAA single game record, for minimum of X amount of punts.
Yeah. It was one of the first few games as a non-conference game, really, showed the leg that he has at a very early point. He remains ASU's all-time leader in punting average at 46.2. And that's about a yard and a half or 2 yards greater than the second place. And in punting, you're usually not separated by too much. So that is a 2 yards or so is a pretty substantial gap. He was back-to-back first-team All-Pac-12 in 2019 and 20. He's the only punter in this era that we're covering to earn multiple first-team All-Conference honors for ASU. So the numbers speak for themselves. Now, he did leave, had that really odd deal. There were a couple things that you could say were odd deals, but there was that first one as far as the NFL draft of him just kind of going in there, bench pressing a ton, not getting picked, and coming back to college, which I think people should be able to do, especially in this crazy era of college sports. Chose to transfer to Oklahoma. I believe that was some, personal health decision related things. We will put it gently as such.
Yeah.
Ended up not getting drafted, not playing in the NFL, which is, it's kind of surprising. It seemed like he was really going to be off to the races to do that. But again, worth recognizing. We're going to, we got to be honest and fair here. What he did at ASU, again, he's got some career records and some accomplishments that nobody in these last 25 years can match up with. So though his time in Tempe was pretty limited to less than a season and a half, still include him. He still deserves it.
Been covering this team since 2011, been to a lot of practices over that span and seen a lot of strong legs, but the ball off Turk's foot to this day just sounded different. It's in a different category. And, the Turk bombs that he launched, just in a category in and of itself. And obviously he did what he did in his brief-ish time at Arizona State, but yeah, it just simply can't be denied. Your first game out, you set an NCAA punting record, pretty good. And your name's still in the etched in the record books by by a fair margin, pretty good. So, and taking home some nice hardware to boot, yeah, easy pick.
So moving along with the special teams, we're going to name a long snapper and a guy that really deserves it. Mitchell Framboni played at ASU from 2014 to 2017. Regarded as an all-conference long snapper by Phil Steele during his career. I don't believe that the Pac-12 had long snappers on their they had like a special teams guy. I think Case Catch won it.
Yeah, kind of
your
like
gunners, your tacklers, your
yeah.
protectors, that sort of thing. But I don't believe they recognized long snappers. But he was widely regarded as one of the better snappers in the nation. Incredibly consistent for ASU. Again, if you're a long snapper and they're not saying your name a lot, that means you're doing some good things.
Stuff.
And he's made his way into the NFL. He's been with the Broncos since 2022. If I'm not mistaken, he's the only true long snapper from ASU in this era we're covering to make it to the NFL. We love Travis Gaethel with the Raiders. He tried his hand at long snapping, and that did not go particularly well. Framboni is still with the Broncos. Earlier this year, signed a 3-year, $4.175 million extension with the Broncos. So a local guy became a long snapper here, and he's getting paid for it. And if you can, remain a long snapper and stay with teams and keep that thing going, you can do that for a very long time and add to your bank account quite a bit.
That was what was Brian Jennings like with the Niners, like 14, 15 years.
Jason Kyle too, with Kerry, he's a guy in the early 90s. Yeah, I mean that's the deal where if you can latch on and just stick to your craft, you can play for a while. Yeah,
but Framboni's a guy that you don't hear his name, that's good, but also he's a guy that if you watch some of the special teams plays, also gave a lot of effort, make the snap, then run down, try to make a tackle, and be a key part of that. And yeah, I think it's a pretty good pick, and it's cool to see him doing, one of those jobs. It's obviously not glamorous. It's not getting not getting any pub, but definitely, one of the key parts of the game, because if your long snapper screwing up, then you definitely know that's very, very evident.
So we're going to wind things down. The last two picks of our team are kick and punt returners. And there were some really good ones, which, was kind of compelling because, the names that we're going to mention, certainly memorable. But I think generally speaking, a lot of folks kind of think that ASU maybe has not had really dynamic return specialist. But there have been a handful of guys, some of which were also starred on offense, or ones that were really sunk their teeth into the return game. So starting at kick returner, another local guy, Jamal Miles, on the team from 2009 to 2012. He was a second-team All Pac-12 kick returner in 2011, honorable mention in 2010. Got himself a lot of work. 2 of the top 6 highest single-season totals in terms of the just amount of kick returns in Sun Devil history. 2 of the top 8 single seasons in terms of kick return yards in Sun Devil history he had during his time here. He is, and here's basically what seals it, is he's ASU's single season record holder in kick return touchdowns with 2 in 2011, and ASU's all-time career leader with 3 kickoff returns for touchdowns. You see those numbers in the record book. That's the pick right there. And man, I remember that 2011 season, though. Again, we've talked about it and how things fell apart at the end. When things were going good, Jamal Miles there was a bit of time where he was as dangerous as of a return guy as there was in college football.
Also, I believe had a punt return for touchdown against Oregon State in 11.
And he threw the touchdown to Pflugrad, right?
He did.
Against Missouri in the first ever blackout game.
And boy, did Nolan Mazzoni love him on a swing pass.
Yeah, for sure. Out of Peoria, if I'm not mistaken, again, a local guy there, someone who's
Rattlers
played a long time for the Rattlers. I think he's still maybe with them. So again, local guy, done well for sure. Okay, so winding things down, the final selection of this entire team that we're putting together is a punt returner. And brother, let me tell you, especially in 2005, this guy was absolutely electric on punt returns. I just posted a video of a punt return touchdown that he had just a couple weeks ago, and the official Sun Devil football Twitter account was kind of asking for some memories, because this is one that I'll never forget, and a lot of folks will never forget as well. And that would be, of course, my guy Terry Richardson, in the program from 02 through 06. He was a second-team All-American as a return specialist in 2005, and a first-team All Pac-10 selection that year at the position. Second-team All Pac-10 returner in 2006. Again, that 2005 season was something legendary. you know that by having seen it, but when you break down the numbers, it really adds to it. He had 337 punt return yards in 2005, good for the 5th highest single season total in school history. And of the other 4 players that comprise the top 5 in punt return yardage, the most recent, other than T. Rich, that any of them played was 1970.
A different game.
Yes. So when you have that sort of thing, it's kind of like we're talking about with Salamo Fiso, and he's within like a top 5 list of guys that played decades before him. That really says something to me. 2 career punt return touchdowns. That ranks 2nd all time at ASU, behind Lenny Randall, who sadly passed away, I believe, within the last year. Played in the 1960s. But man, and no one's matched that number since. No one has had 2 punt return touchdowns or more in a season since T. Rich did in 2005. You talk about being a playmaker. Both of those punt returns for touchdowns, unforgettable. Had that 84-yarder against number 1 USC in the first half when College Game Day was on campus. And I mean, when that touchdown was scored, I don't even know if there's really like YouTube footage of at least that clip, because I feel like I haven't seen it maybe since it happened. But that was like the decibel level in Sun Devil Stadium on that day. That was one of the loudest that I've ever heard Sun Devil Stadium when T. Rich had that 84-yard punt return for a touchdown. Then later on in the season, he did it yet again, a 71-yarder with less than 8 minutes to go against Arizona in a game that ASU trailed by a couple touchdowns in the second half. That touchdown and the ensuing 2-point conversion tied the game. Then ASU kicked a game-winning field goal in the final seconds. T. Rich doesn't run that back. ASU may not have won the Territorial Cup that year. So that season and elsewhere in his career, again, just absolutely dynamic in that 05. There are some players that just catch lightning in a bottle. And that was the case for Terry Richardson in 2005. Again, I don't think there was a player in the country that year that I'd prefer to punt the ball to less than I would to Terry Richardson.
Yeah, those 2 moments were just absolutely ridiculous. And I that's the one against U of A especially, because obviously with everything that the Territorial Cup means and just the clutch nature of that return. And he had some good moments, on offense, that as a wide receiver. But man, it was just like one of those guys that you kind of when the 4th down punt team's running on, you kind of slide up in your seat a little bit. Like, oh, okay, like hopefully give him a chance to return. That the list of guys that are that electric that ASU's had is pretty short, and they've had some good returners, but like that's the one. Like anything can happen once if he's got a crease. Oh boy, get ready.
Yeah, especially when he was like a complimentary receiver to Derek Hagan. 2003, 4, 5. He played a really good role there, and man, that punt return touchdowns, both that he had there in 2005, something very, very special. So that rounds out our special teams. We'll mention a couple guys, or at least one that just barely missed the cut on returns. There are a lot of guys you can go with. Tim White put together a very star-studded. Like statistically, he holds some records at ASU. If it just weren't for these record-setting the likes of Miles and Richardson in terms of the touchdowns, the big plays, Tim White's a guy that really could have been included there as well. Brandon Ayuk was a very good return man. Elijah Badger, was solid as well. There are others throughout these last 2.5 decades of Sun Devil football that deserve to be included in the conversation. But just when you have those big plays like Miles and Richardson, that earns the distinction for those 2.
Yeah, White had that return touchdown against Utah. That was a very explosive play, and obviously he did so much, as a receiver, but electric as a return man as well. Mentioned Ayuk earlier, but yeah, that when you're going up against like Jamal Miles, Terry Richardson, that's just a clear cut as day. I guess and I think we'll leave the holder discussion to our audience.
There you go. Yes,
leave them some homework.
Yeah, let us know, who do you pick as your favorite holder in the last 25 years of Sun Devil football. So that rounds out the list. So what would you think? Is it Alden Darby? I was going to say, what were the toughest cuts? Alden Darby is definitely there for me. It was, Andrew Walter was difficult as well because, again, that was the time that I was in school. And I know that what does that matter? But I just remember like watching that, just the awe-inspiring thing. And the fact that, he played a good amount as a redshirt freshman, and then just in 2002, like he shows up out of nowhere in that San Diego State game and just starts flinging the ball to Sean McDonald, and the rest is truly history. Those were 2 tough ones for me. I think offensively, just the running backs, fullbacks, wide receivers, there are a lot of other good ones that we could have picked, but the ones we chose just really stood out on their own. I would say for me, the 2 toughest ones were Alden Darby and maybe Andrew Walter, but Darby's definitely the one that was the toughest one to cut for me.
Darby is there. The fact that like Demario, we couldn't find a place for him is wild, but just speaks to the incredible nature of the two dudes that are well deserving, obviously, in that spot. I believe Mike Nixon, I loved as a linebacker with his 3-pick game.
Yeah,
it's burned into my mind. But that's another. But yeah, it's just like again, like you go through. It's like kind of one of those things. Like, all right, this guy got snubbed. Well, okay, he taken out? And it's like, oh, geez, like that's the tough part. I mean, just you can't do it. I think we've done well, and I think that some people might have that one controversial pick, but I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll throw those out to the people, and they'll let us know. Maybe there's some other area where maybe we should have added.
Yeah, and honestly, it's been interesting so far, and just in kind of the teasers that we've done on social media. I wasn't sure if folks would look at like Shamari Simmons as a pick that might be called into question. I don't think that it should be. I selected that and agreed with Brad. But maybe there are others that folks, whether it's an Alden Darby or otherwise. But I got a lot of responses of because we're having some fun with it, being a little cryptic and vague and that sort of thing. And I had a couple people respond that you better put Shamari on there, like don't tell me you're going to leave him out. So that shows that his presence resonated with a lot of fans, as it should, and that is great to see. So let's just buzz through the list one more time to close things out for our all quarter century team of Sun Devil football. Quarterback, Taylor Kelly. Running backs, Eno Benjamin and Cam Scadaboo. Fullback, Mike Carney. Wide receivers, Sean McDonald, Derek Hagan, Jalen Strong, and N'Keal Harry. The all-purpose performer in DJ Foster. Tight end, Zach Miller. The offensive tackles were Levi Jones and Evan Finkenberg. The interior offensive linemen, Scott Peters, Mike Pollock, and Leif Fautanu. The defensive linemen on the ends, you have Terrell Suggs, the incomparable T Sizzle, Dexter Davis. Then on the interior of the D-line, Lawrence Guy, Will Sutton, the rush linebacker in Carl Bradford, the three traditional linebackers in Dale Robinson, Brandon Magee, and Salamo Fiso, the cornerbacks, Omar Bolden and Chase Lucas. Our safeties were Troy Nolan, Damarious Randall, and Shamari Simmons. The kicker, of course, Zane Gonzalez, the record holder. Punter, Michael Turk. Long snapper, Mitchell Fraboni. Kick returner, Jamal Miles. And punt returner, Terry Richardson.
I just keep going back to thinking that of a 3rd and goal from the 3, Mike Carney leading Cam Scadaboo on a dive play. There will be no survivors on defense.
Like that would just be such a thing of pure beauty. Or just to see them it's 3rd and short from like their own 10-yard line, and he just breaks through, and Carney just makes it a life goal to put a hat on all 11 defenders on the way to the end zone for Scat to get a touchdown. I think that's one of those fantasy combinations of Carney and Scat. And how ironic is it? What number is Cam Scadaboo wearing in the NFL with the New York Giants?
That's true.
That 44. I don't know if it's an homage to Mike Carney, but in our hearts, we can believe that it is.
We got to get some AI expert to put together this team and then Madden sim it against some other great teams of the past.
Or you could do the new college football game. Hey, you know
true,
what?
That's true.
Somebody who's really into video games, playing NCAA football, man, please make this happen. Put together this lineup for us. I'm past my. If this would have been like 2010 or 2006 in the old PlayStation 2 version, I'd have been right on it. But I'm a little past my prime in that regard.
All right, I think that's gonna do it. That's our team. So obviously, you folks probably have some opinions. So make sure to send us some messages on social media. Tell us what we got right, what we did wrong, who got snubbed. All that good stuff. You can follow the show on Twitter at SOTD Podcast, on Instagram at Speak of the Devils. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/SOTD Podcast. And give me a follow on all things social at BDenny29.
And you can follow me at Joe Healey 42. If you want to call me an idiot for not picking Vontaze Burfict, go right for it. Just make sure you follow me first. That's just common courtesy, right? A huge shout out to our incredible sponsors, Cactus Sports, Jones Auto Group, Burrito Express. Saw that there's another partnership going on with BE and that running back Kyson Brown, if I'm not mistaken. DevilsDigest.com. You got to get in the mix there. That transition, the merger, I guess you could say, between Rivals and On3 is on and live here on July 1st. I'm starting to kind of dig into that. That's such a cool combination there. So absolutely no better time to be a subscriber to Devil's Digest. And of course, a lot of love to Spaghetti Shack and Sun Devil Family Charities.
As well as Home Field Apparel. Make sure you get 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com using offer code SUN24, SUN24. Then also make sure to drop us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. Joe and I will be back in a couple weeks. Folks, ASU football is back this month.